Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Tommy Hattori, and I'm here to share a little bit about the Hattori family and the white abalone. I was asked a couple weeks ago to fill in for someone else that was originally slated to be in our schedule, and I've given a number of talks about my grandfather and his involvement with the white abalone, and was thinking about how to make this talk a little bit different and how I was going to approach it and what was going to be kind of my goal with today's talk, because I'll talk about it a little bit here in a bit, but I gave a very similar talk in this exact same hall about 2 years ago, in which I shared some new developments that had happened around my grandfather and our understanding around the discovery of the white abalone and what his involvement was, and some amazing evidence that we had found through the help of Tim. And so I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach today, and my goal is to provide some context around my grandfather and his role in the discovery of the white abalone. But my secondary goal is to kind of tie things together as to what our family is now doing. Oftentimes when I've done this talk, it's been very much about the history, things that have happened way back in, the 1930s, the 40s, and the 50s. And I think that sometimes it's easy to get kind of lost in the historical perspective of what happened, and that's all in the past, and now we just talk about the past. But I think one of the things that's been really exciting for me as I continue to do this work is to think about what the white abalone still means to our family and why it's so important and what it does for our family as we continue to move forward. So that's kind of my goal in today's talk. I've also been asked to make a couple of announcements before we get started. The first one is that we do have 2 restrooms in the room, a men's restroom and a ladies' restroom on either side. We also do have a wonderful refreshment stand that's put together by my parents in the back, and we do have nut and gluten-free refreshments today. Correct, Mom? Yeah, all right. The other thing I wanted to say before we got started is we are doing an abalone artist project. So if you are an artist and you are interested in participating in our abalone art project, there is a table in the back that you can take a look at. We are asking anyone that is an artist or an aspiring artist or is interested and has some creativity to take one of these blanks, and we want you to decorate it in whatever vision that you have for abalone. These were cut out by my father, Rick Hattori, who's in the back and will be very shy, but might wave a little bit. No, oh, he waved. And it's our hope as another way of kind of bringing awareness around abalone and what that all is. So I like to start my talks often with this quote from my grandfather. I would like to be remembered as a person who spent his life by, near, on, and in the ocean. And it really speaks to me about who my grandfather was, how important the ocean was to him, how important Monterey was to him, and why this story is filled with both amazing joy and amazing sadness. And I think it's really important to understand the duality of what that is and to recognize both of those and hold both of those truths in the same hand. The other thing that I think is really important for me is the story of abalone is very much a love story of my grandparents. This shell on the right-hand side I always include in my presentations. It was a shell that my grandfather dove for, collected, polished, and then etched my grandmother's name into it. And he did that before they were married. So if you actually look at the date on it, it's 1937, and that was before they actually started dating, got together. So this was really early on in their relationship, in them knowing each other. Very quickly, he realized that this was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with to build out our family. And so this is the one thing I actually felt was really important for my grandparents' house. And when they passed away, that was the one thing I asked if I could take. And so this hangs in my house today. And it's a daily reminder for me of what abalone means to our family and how we connect to our past.
Is that where that disappeared to?
I think the other thing that's really nice about my grandfather, and one of the unique things about him, is that we were very, very fortunate that there was so much documentation taken of him. So often these stories are lost. They're lost to time, they're passed down as oral histories, and we just don't always write things down. And we have these incredible photographs and these incredible documentation of my grandfather telling his story, either written or in video, because of the interesting circumstances that he was around. So these photographs were taken by Ray Ruppel, who was a Life magazine photographer, and they were planning on doing a feature. They never actually published the feature because of the time period. We believe it may have had something to do with the war and kind of anti-Japanese American sentiment of what was going on, but we have these absolutely incredible high-resolution photos of my grandfather in all of his gear. And so it's amazing that we have all of these different pieces that we're able to kind of put together what his story is. I've mentioned white abalone a couple times, and we will have the white abalone captive breeding program talking a little bit about them in more detail scientifically this afternoon. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone had a basic level understanding that white abalone are one of the 7 species of abalone that exist in California. They are the deepest water of the California abalone, so they were the last to be discovered of those 7. And my grandfather had always told us growing up that he was the discoverer of the white abalone. And as is often the case when your grandparents tell you things, you say, "Sure, Grandpa, you did that," because we didn't really know. But he had this amazing story about how he had gone down to Santa Barbara, he had done some diving, he had found these abalone that he had never seen before, and he brought them back to a gentleman that collected shells in town, and to a gentleman named Andrew Sorensen, and said, "I believe these are a different species." And if you look at the name of the abalone, you will notice that it is named Haliotis sorenseni. So it is named after Andrew Sorensen, so it did line up with a lot of what we've seen. But again, we didn't have a whole lot of evidence about that. And it was just this lovely story that we kind of told within our family. A few years ago, I started getting really involved in this when I was searching the internet, as we often do sometimes, and just kind of Googling our family's names, and I happened to Google Roy Hattori, and this popped up. And it was a small kind of infographic material put together by an artist scientist named Oriana Poindexter, who was studying abalone and trying to raise awareness around them, and she actually wrote in it that it was discovered by Roy Hattori. And this got me really excited, because it was the first time kind of in print with someone that wasn't connected with the family that I got to see my grandfather's name attached to the abalone. From there, I actually reached out to Oriana and kind of asked where she got her information from. I was really intrigued to learn a little bit more, and she let me know that she actually was, in her course of her research, found this book by Scrap Lundy. This was both very exciting for us as a family, but also a little bit deflating, because we knew about this book. Scrap Lundy was a local historian here based in Monterey that knew my grandfather quite well. And so it was really wonderful that there was an attribution to my grandfather around the white abalone and discovery, but it also meant that that was coming from my grandfather. If it was coming from Scrap, it had been because he had had discussions with my grandfather. It didn't really add another piece of evidence to that. But it did seem to gain some traction. Our next thing that we saw was the White Abalone Captive Breeding Project out of UC Davis, and they actually put that on the story map. So if you go to their website today, which I encourage you to all do, you will see in their history of abalone, they actually identify my grandfather, Roy Hattori, as the discoverer of the white abalone, and they include links to some videos that he recorded. I said once again, we're really fortunate that he has a number of kind of documented pieces of him talking about his experiences, and you can see it there. One of the interesting things is we don't actually have any video recording of him talking about white abalone. It's something that's always been really interesting. It's something that we've talked a lot about as a family, and I've thought a lot about as why he never recorded. And Tim and I have had conversations around this, and he really talked joyfully towards the end of his life around abalone and the diving and reminiscing about all of that. But he really got upset whenever there was the conversation turning to white abalone, and he also got upset when the conversation turned to the camps. And so these were two things that he felt, we believe, very much were taken from him. And because they were taken from him, he may not have wanted to share that in those sorts of ways, which means that it's kind of our generation, our responsibility as the next generation to do that for him. So it's been really exciting to kind of continue along these paths. I am a math and science teacher by trade, and so when we started getting into this kind of world, I got really excited about kind of doing some research. And so I went down to the Hopkins Marine Station over in Pacific Grove and went into their library, went into their archives, and started looking for the original documentation around this. I found the original species description from 1940 by Paul Barsh, in which it is written what the discovery was. And I think there's a couple of really key things about this. The first one is that Mr. Sorensen is clearly identified as being the person that sent in the shells. I also think it's incredibly important to note that from Mr. Sorensen, it says a commercial abalone diver. So that person was not named in that letter. I think that was intentional. The other thing is, after one was found, a diligent search for 2 weeks succeeded in only finding 3 more. So this also tells me that this diver didn't just find a whole bunch of shells and think, oh, maybe something's different about it, maybe it's not. He knew something was different about it. He went and did a diligent search to try to find more. He knew he had found something different. So this unnamed diver had found this new species of abalone, something he was pretty certain was different, and he went and looked for more, was not named in it. Because he was not named in it, the species was named after Andrew Sorensen. Again, this seems to line up with what we know. Also, interestingly, later on in that document, we found out that there was a subspecies of red abalone that was named after my grandfather. So this is Haliotis rufens, oh, I'm probably butchering that name, Hattori. And so I didn't really know about this, but looking in this document, it turned out that there was a subspecies that was named after him. Interestingly enough, he is actually named in this document from 1940. So really fascinating to me that he was willing to they were willing to name him in a subspecies in this time period, but they excluded any mention of his name in the exact same document for the new species. Again, if we think about the time period, this is right before World War II, right before Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese American sentiment is kind of at an all-time high. It would make a lot of sense that we would try to erase from the most important part of this discovery. And so this is kind of where we stalled out. We didn't really have a whole lot of new information. There were a couple books that were published. There was a wonderful abalone book by Anne Valasis. If you haven't read it before and you want to learn more about abalone, I highly recommend it, in which she also attributes the discovery of the white abalone to my grandfather, which was again very exciting, but not necessarily new evidence. She was kind of looking at the same things that we had found. And for my family, we started to get really excited about just getting involved in this. And so for so often, you know, this had been very much a historical kind of thing that was going on, but I felt like we were starting to tap into something that was new. And so we're very fortunate. My family lives down in Los Angeles, Palos Verdes area, and we're really close to the Cabrillo Aquarium, which is one of the big spots doing white abalone breeding. And so we were able to go down and actually visit that facility. It turns out that one of the parents of one of my students at the school that I'm at actually helped start this program. Weirdly enough, I was walking around with that abalone book and she stopped me because she was like, why are you carrying around an abalone book? And she was like, I started the project there at Cabrillo Aquarium. So we got to go down and see a photo exhibit about white abalone, and they actually allowed us to feed the white abalone, which was really, really exciting. There's my daughter Marge, she's standing in the back there feeding a white abalone. So we got to see kind of, and start getting involved in what was going on. In 2024, we discovered some new information. And so as I said before, I gave a talk that was somewhat related to this a couple years ago, and I came up and was able to host a talk with Tim, because Tim had done some amazing research. He had reached out to the Smithsonian and actually asked for the original documents that were sent about the white abalone. And in that, we were able to find the original letters that Andrew Sorensen had wrote. The first letter didn't really provide a whole lot. and it actually was just what we had seen in the document before. It's a little bit hard to read on the screen, but it basically says it was found at quick conception by a commercial abalone diver in so much depth, and that they looked for more and couldn't find any more. And so again, this is almost verbatim what we see in the species description. And so we kind of thought, okay, that's wonderful seeing the original documentation, but again, nothing all that new. Fascinatingly, in one of the follow-up letters that was about something else, Andrew Sorensen actually names my grandfather. And the reason he does so is actually not in honor of my grandfather, interestingly enough, which I think ties us back to this entire story and lets us understand what was going on. This letter is him actually vouching for a different diver. So in this letter, he is actually saying, I want you to name, Paul Barsh, he's writing to Dr. Barsh, I want you to name another subspecies about a different diver, because these divers are collecting these shells for me, and I've gotten in a little bit of trouble. But when he's doing that, when he's trying to vouch for this other diver, he actually writes for the first time that this other diver is jealous of diver Roy Hattori, who had one of them named for him. Hattori also brought up the original large ones that you named H. Sorensen. And so this was a really, really key moment for us. This was the actual written letter, handwritten letter from Andrew Sorensen talking about who discovered the white abalone. And if we think back to it again, remember, it wasn't just that that diver found a whole bunch of shells and turned them all in to Andrew Sorensen. He found this shell that looked different and tried to find more of it. He knew what he had found was different. He knew that it was something new, yet his name had been left off of it. And so this was really, really exciting for us. We did a talk a couple of years ago to kind of share this news, and we weren't really sure where to go from there. This sounded really exciting. A lot of people were asking, oh, can we get the name changed? Can we do all this other stuff? And we weren't really sure. It was kind of a big shrug at the moment. But what I knew is that this was really exciting for me and really exciting for our family to continue to stay involved in it. And so there have been a number of things that have happened since then that has gotten us even more involved in this world. Tim was able to put me in contact with a professor, Richard King, over at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, who had a class that was on marine journalism. They were kind of looking at how to do research and look at kind of things that had happened historically in the marine environment. And they stumbled on this story of my grandfather and the Japanese Americans at large. And they were really excited about talking to Tim and talking to me about it, and so excited that they actually asked me to help co-author this paper with them. And so we spent a bunch of time. I was able to zoom in with the class. We did a bunch of interviews kind of talking about what that was. One of the things I really loved about this was I really encourage you to go out and get this issue. It's available online for free, so that's why I put all the information up there. See History Magazine, issue 188, autumn 2024. But they use my grandfather as kind of an example of a larger story. One of the things that's really important to me around all of this is that I love the attention for my grandfather. I love that we're using him as this example of these things that have happened, but he's not the only one. This is an entire community, and I think it's so important that we're in the Japanese American Citizens League Hall to talk about these sorts of things. These are large injustices that have happened in our country, and we need to make sure that we don't forget them, especially in the times that we're living in today, right? We repeat the mistakes we don't learn from. And so thinking about what this is, not just around this isolated incident of my grandfather, there's an amazing story here about my grandfather, but it's much more about the larger community. This group of students did an amazing job really kind of telling that entire story. So really encourage you to go and check that out. And it was really a pleasure for me to be able to be involved in this. I believe this is actually my first time ever having my name kind of associated with a paper. Again, as a math science person, I don't deal a lot in the humanities and writing, and so I was very fortunate that I got to be kind of an editor on it. They allowed me just to kind of hop in and provide some different things. Didn't actually ask me to write any paragraphs down, because that's not one of my skill sets. But really wonderful to be able to kind of continue to be involved in what that was. The next thing we kind of discovered as a family was that we had so much interest in abalone, all this amazing history in abalone, and we actually had almost no abalone shells. My grandfather was an amazing man, and he loved abalone and loved diving and loved being in the ocean, and he also loved giving everything away. And so I actually didn't own, the only abalone shell that I owned was the one that I had gotten from my grandparents that was hanging up on our wall. And so Tom North, who's sitting here with us today, heard about, wonderful round of applause, is an abalone diver and was connected to my parents and learned that we didn't have many abalone shells, and especially didn't have any white abalone shells. And it turns out that in his diving, he had collected a very large collection of abalone shells and some white abalones. And he was so gracious, he invited my mother and I to go down to his house down in Big Sur and gifted us these abalone shells. And so now in our house, we have this wonderful display of abalone, including some really, really precious white abalone shells because of Tom. So really want to recognize Tom and his involvement. And this just has continued to kind of evolve for us, thinking about what is our involvement as a family? Why is this so important? Where do we kind of go from here? Last year, we hosted the first Abalone Festival, and it was an amazing success. And really, I unfortunately was not able to be here. I was out of town with my family, but I was thinking about why this festival is important, why it's so important to me that all of you are here today to kind of hear about these things. And it really started to occur to me that it's really about our family. This is our family story. This is something that ties us together. And so here's some pictures of my parents, who are again in the back, and them meeting Dr. Kristen Aquilino, who is part of the White Abalone Captive Breeding Project up at UC Davis Bodega Bay. And we also had some cousins who came from far out of town. I believe Stockton, did they come from? Yeah. And so thinking about these activities, these events, as really community and family gatherings starts to provide so much more meaning for me as to why they're important and why they are so meaningful. A couple slides ago, I showed a picture of the talk that was here, and I put up a photo that I certainly embarrassed my daughter, but it was a picture of my daughter with my Auntie Bronco, who's also in the back, and my niece Jessica. And thinking about each of these events is another reason for us to get together. As I said before, I unfortunately don't live in Monterey anymore. I only come up a couple times a year, but having these opportunities and reasons to kind of come back, to reconnect with everyone, to spend time together, becomes more and more important as I get older, and especially as my kids start to grow in age, making sure that they have a connection to this place. I'm fourth generation Monterey, and it's so meaningful to me that my children, despite not growing up in Monterey, feel that Monterey is a part of their lives. And so being able to have these sorts of occasions to bring us all together is really important. We also continue to build out our network and understanding of who are the different people involved in the White Abalone and how can we continue to stay connected. So from this meeting of my parents and Dr. Kristen, my parents put me in contact with Kristen, and we were able to set up a visit for us to go up to visit Bodega Bay. So this was actually just this past December. My family took a little trip up the coast, and we were able to visit the UC Davis Bodega Bay Marine Laboratory, which is a gorgeous facility. If you ever have the opportunity, highly recommend going. There's also some lovely seafood restaurants right next door there in Bodega Bay. We were able to get some fish and chips there as well. But we were able to go and actually hold white abalone for the very first time. This was so meaningful to us as a family. This is, again, a story that I remember hearing as a small child, and something that once again was very joyful for my grandfather and very sad for my grandfather. And so every time I'm able to reconnect with this, with white abalone, whether it is physically touching them or whether it is gathering with people that want to learn more about it, I feel a connection back to my grandfather and what that means and why It's so important. So this was such a unique opportunity for us to go up and see. This is the largest collection of white abalone that exists, I believe, anywhere. Maybe? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. And so really exciting for us to be able to go up and continue. From there, we actually talked to them about what are the kind of current efforts, which again, you'll hear a little bit more about later on today, but how can we continue to stay involved? And they were nice enough to invite us to continue to work with them. One of the things that's also, for me, been so meaningful is thinking about my children. What is their involvement with this going to be? And so after we had actually met Kristen up at the White Abalone Project up in Bodega Bay, my daughter, March, who is in middle school, said, I want to do something about this. This seems really important. This seems like something that's really connected to our family. How can I make a difference? And she's in middle school in the Girl Scouts, and she gets to do something called a Silver Award Project. And she said, can I do it on the White Abalone? And as you might imagine, I was very excited about that. And so she started doing research. She took some notes, she started building out some community maps. Who are we connected to? Who's meaningful on this? And you'll notice she met with Tim Thomas at the JACL Heritage Museum. You know, we were able to go down to Cabrillo Aquarium, the UC Davis Bodega Bay. And then over here, thinking about why is this important? I think so often when our students are asked to do projects, they do the thing that they think is going to get them the good grade. They do the thing that they think is going to kind of be the path of least resistance. And I've transitioned from being in math and science to being more in experiential education. And one of the things I've really noticed is our students make an impact when it's something that's meaningful to them. And so for her to take this on meant so much to me. It was something that got me really, really excited about what that was. And so as part of her Silver Award, she actually created this informational pamphlet, which is on each of your seats. So she put this together. She actually drew the abalone. So she is a budding artist. That is actually her freehand abalone that she has drawn. And we're just so excited about what are the next stages, where do we go from here, how do we continue to build on what this was. In the course of her research, we actually, in meeting with Kristen, when they were talking, it turned out that they were going to be doing a spawning program. And so, after that, this past February, we were actually able to go down to the Cabrillo Aquarium and participate in our first white abalone spawning. This was so exciting for our family, not just to see what was going on, but to actually be able to participate. So my kids got to actually get in there and got to help measure some abalone. They got to help clean the shells. You had to clean off the shells in order to get them prepared for them to do the spawning event. And then actually got to stick around and see how a lot of science is waiting around and seeing and praying that those abalone actually spawn. We were there for a large number of hours until it started to get close to our kids probably needing to go to bed. So we actually scooted them out of there. But it was so exciting because overnight we actually got an email from Alyssa, the lead scientist with the White Abalone Captive Breeding Project, that there had actually been successful spawning. And so it was really meaningful for us that we were able to contribute in a small way to what that is. And it's so wonderful for our kids to be able to be involved in it. Like, how do they actually contribute to this species that has been connected to our family since the 1930s? Just really, really incredible for us as we continue to be involved in it. And so that brings us to the question I kind of had 2 years ago, because 2 years ago we had this really seminal moment for our family where we had this new piece of evidence, kind of the first really big leap forward that we had, and everyone had these questions. So what's that next step? And I didn't know. But I think I've started to understand a little bit more about what I want our family to continue to be involved with. The first one is we have loved our involvement with the White Abalone Captive Breeding Program. I've continued to talk to them. I believe we're going to be on the mailing list for any of the spawnings that are going on, and we plan to plug into those every single time. Again, any touch point that we can have around being involved with the White Abalone is so meaningful to us. I'm also interested in connecting with the Bay Foundation, who does some of the outplanting. Weirdly enough, in another part of my job, I've started trying to learn how to do some scuba diving. I used to get really seasick when I was younger, so I didn't spend a whole lot of time on the ocean, but one of my colleagues is an expert diver, and she's been trying to get me into the water, so I've been doing a little bit of scuba diving in our school pool. And so I'm trying to actually learn how to scuba dive in the hopes that I might be able to be involved in an outplanting someday. I think that would be really amazing to actually help contribute putting white abalone back into the ocean after my grandfather was part of the process of removing them from the ocean. I think, for the longest time, my big goal was just making sure my grandfather's name was out there. Again, this was something that he told us that clearly was meaningful to him, but also provided a lot of heartache, and it was important for me to just be out there and use my voice to let people know. I'm comfortable speaking in front of crowds. Let's take advantage of that and get me out there. And so I've done a number of talks with the Monterey Public Library. I did a bunch of talks when I was living down in Ohlone with the local library there. I've continued to do talks at my school. So just how can we get as much awareness out there? And as we've continued to build awareness, in more and more of my conversations with scientists, it seems like a name change might actually be possible. And so for a long time, we kind of viewed that as a little bit of a pipe dream, but I think as we've started to see more and more kind of collective interest in this story, as we've started to understand a little bit more of the time period, what that meant, how we can right some of the wrongs, I think I'd like to lean a little bit more into that idea of how could that name change actually occur, what would that look like, what would it entail. My understanding is we would probably need a graduate student who wanted to actually write maybe their dissertation around that topic, kind of providing scientific evidence of what that is. We are recording this, so if there are any graduate students who are excited about that prospect, I would love to partner with you. Or maybe I need to go back to school, which would make my mother very happy. But I think there's amazing opportunities there to think about what that is. And then I think this festival is something that's really exciting for me. Thinking about what that next step is can sometimes be difficult. I gave a talk somewhat along these lines 2 years ago in which I presented, but then I wasn't really sure where was I going to be going from there. And seeing all the people in the room, thank you all for being here, seeing all the excitement around abalone, and also thinking about what this means for our family has meant so much. I've said a couple times that I don't live in town anymore, and yet Monterey is so much a part of me. And as I get older, I also start to realize how much I need to make sure I'm connected to this place. I also realize how much I need to make sure that I'm connected to my parents. And so something that's been really important for me is thinking about the fact that we're able to do this together. The fact that my parents are here in the room, the fact that they have always supported me in everything that I've done, continued to kind of lift me up and amplify me, has meant so much. I think this whole festival has been a testament to that. When Tim asked me to be involved in it, my mother right away was like, whatever you need, I'm here for you. And we've already begun discussions about what this looks like in 2027, about my mom and dad taking on a larger role in kind of helping support to make sure this is something that we continue to build forward. And so for me, I just want to express so much gratitude to my parents for everything that you've done, for raising me and allowing me to be here and present this to all of you. So, I guess I can answer questions if we have one.
So most of the stuff was talked about down at Point Conception.
Mm-hmm.
Is there white abalone in Monterey, and what is white abalone's habitat? Where do they live?
Yeah, so white abalone's habitat, and I have a lot of scientists in the room, so you're putting me really on the spot here, but it's mostly kind of Southern California down to Baja California. I think Point Conception might be right about the edge of that habitat. I've seen some thumbs up, I got it right. So yeah, when my grandfather used to do his diving, they would often go all the way down the coast. Interestingly enough, he had a lot of stories about diving in San Pedro, which is the neighboring town to where I now live. And so it's really cool that I get to be kind of in that area that he used to go down to. But unfortunately, white abalone were not in this area. I think they needed the warmer water down south. Yeah, Tom.
Tom, you might point out that the white abalone also occupies a different depth from other, and different abalone occupy different areas in the ocean biome.
Yeah. So, and I think that's also a really important point, because when initially the idea of kind of attributing my grandfather to the discovery of white abalone came up, I actually got a little bit concerned about it. I've done a lot of my work in kind of scientific research and history, and so often when we attribute discovery of things, it's just the first European that discovered something or found something. And so there was a lot of concerns I had around the idea of my grandfather being the discoverer of white abalone, because there were people that lived here for 10,000 years. I'm pretty sure they found white abalone before that. The only reason I think it may be true that he was one of the first humans to really see them and discover them is because of the depth he had to be at to find them. They needed kind of that perfect storm of Japanese technology they had brought over for the hard hat diving to go to that depth at that time period. And so it felt a little bit better that it wasn't just kind of the colonizer's interpretation of what discovery was, and he may have actually been one of the first people to find it. Yes?
Just wondering, is Mr. Sorensen alive? Or?
I do not believe that Mr. Sorensen is alive. Based on a couple Facebook posts I've seen, I believe his family is still around and have commented a few times about not feeling great about my grandfather getting credit for the discovery, but I haven't actually talked to them personally.
Well, the letter seems really strong.
So, yeah, and that was all before kind of we had found that letter, where I think before we had that letter, it was very much two different stories, and it's hard to tell who's actually true about what's going on. And so, so much credit to Tim for doing the research. I'd also just like to say, I know that we'll have time later on to kind of wrap things up. I just want to express so much appreciation to Tim. His incredible friendship to my grandfather, the fact that he took my grandfather on all of those speaking gigs. The reason we have those recordings is because of Tim. Without Tim, we don't have the documentation of my grandfather late in his life sharing those stories, and the fact that he put this entire festival together. This is Tim's baby, and so for me to even be involved in it is just such an honor that he has asked me to be involved, but I can never express enough appreciation to Tim for all that he has done and what he means to us. Oh, what types of abalone are found locally? Definitely red abalone are found here. I've actually seen black abalone. The only abalone that I've actually ever seen here was in a tide pool, was a black abalone. I may be looking at some of the scientists right on that. I know what the other ones are called. Maybe green? No greens.
Greens are south.
Okay, actually, Tom, you would definitely know which ones are here.
So you have black abalone and red abalone locally here, and then the farther south you go, you get the pink, and they also have reds and blacks, but there are species that exist in Southern California and Mexico that don't exist here. But you go north and along the coast of Washington, some Oregon and Canada, you get what's called a pinto abalone, and it's a smaller abalone, but there are abalone in the oceans of the world.
I got a type of question for you. So when you have abalone in colder waters, they tend to be smaller in size than the ones that are further south.
Yeah, the red abalone is the largest in the world. In fact, the largest abalone ever taken was taken in Northern California by a man named John Pepper, and it was 12 3/8 inches in size. It weighed over 14 pounds. Yeah, it was a huge abalone, and so you have the red abalone, and then you have which is the largest, and then the pink is the next, and then the whites and the greens are about the same size, and the pinto is the smallest.
Well, again, thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes that people may want to kind of stand up and stretch their legs a little bit, but don't go too far because we have Keith up next to talk all about the giant kelp restoration project happening right here locally in Monterey Bay. So thank you once again. All right, thank you everyone for being here again. Keith Rutzart learned to dive at San Jose State in 1985 and enjoyed an ocean that he thought was normal, giant kelp forests with plenty of fish. Life took him away from diving, but when he returned in 2009, he found the ocean had changed. The fish were scarce and smaller. He took up counting fish, invertebrates, and algae with Reef Check California and trained volunteer divers how to record data. In 2017, the ocean reached the tipping point and became predictably urchin dependent. He leveraged his experience leading volunteers to establish the Giant Kelp Restoration Project with the goal of restoring kelp to the places that he loved. Please join me in welcoming Keith to the stage.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tommy. I have a little Tommy Vittori, Roy Vittori story myself. So I used to be a diver with the Monterey Bay Sea Otters Dive Club, and so were you. And one of the founding members of that dive club, and I was president, I was safety officer, I was really involved with this dive club, was Roy Vittori. And back in the day, they all had Leatherman jackets and stuff. That was part of diving, you know. And so he was one of my early heroes, and I didn't even know who he was. So my name is Keith Rutzart. I am a conservationist, and I sometimes shoot my mouth off for the 6th grade class. It still is. So yeah, we have a board of directors. This is a nonprofit organization that we founded, and our board of directors is 5 people here, and I'm the executive director. I take pictures underwater with my regulator out, and because that way you can tell when I'm smiling. So in order to talk about kelp, we have to first talk about sea otters. So sea otters are the apex predator in a kelp forest, and they eat everything in that kelp forest. They have a voracious appetite. They eat a quarter of the body weight every day. So they are eating everything, and they eat the healthy invertebrates in the kelp forest, and they help to sustain that kelp forest by reducing the grazing pressure of the invertebrates eating that kelp. They are adorable, right? Like everybody loves a sea otter, right? They have these little teddy bear hands, and they like grab the little things, they eat it on their chest, you know, and show you what they're eating. But they were hunted to almost extinction. The fur trade started in 1741 with Russians that came down and established all this fur trade, and they hunted the sea otter. The sea otter was so valuable, a single pelt was worth $1,000, which at that time was the yearly income of a Pennsylvania farmer. There was only 55 that survived the fur trade, and they were down at Dixie Bridge, and the biologists knew about them, but they didn't tell anybody because they were afraid of being hunted. So, but when these sea otters were extirpated, they were the top predators, so all the prey of the sea otter flourished without them, which included urchins and abalone. These 10-inch abalone shells that you're seeing are not normal. That's the kind of a fluke of what happens when there's no predator going there and eating them when they're 4 inches. So the way that the indigenous people did this was they would form a little group, and they would go out in their canoes, and they would watch the sea otter dive under, and then put his oar up in the water, and all the other ones would form a circle because they knew the sea otter had to come up, and when he come up, then they would spear it, and that's how they hunted sea otters. They also snared them and a lot of hunting with dogs and stuff like that. So I was at Fort Ross and I found this picture. This is depicting a sea otter hunt. These are the indigenous people that lived there in that place, and they were enlisted to hunt the sea otters. So you can see the spear that he's got. It has a detachable tip, and it has a lanyard to it, to the spear, and there's a little, which would be an intestine, that was used as a float to make it so that the sea otters couldn't just go back down again. And they hunted in teams, and they hunted them really efficiently. So what happened was when these, and I didn't realize how thick they were until I was comparing those with Tim, and he was telling me how they carpeted the bottom. There was abalone everywhere in this place, and by the abalone being there, they ate the kelp. That's what they do. And so in 1911, we were going to go fight the Germans in a war. We didn't have the gunpowder, so gunpowder is made from kelp. So they mapped, U.S. Department of Agriculture mapped the kelp forest around the Monterey Peninsula, and you can see here in Monterey, there's just a little bit of kelp over there off of Point Anna, another key word for it. And then down in Carmel, there's a little bit too. So basically no kelp in Monterey for about 100 years. And people like to think of what they see in their own lifetimes as being normal. And we didn't see this. What we saw when we entered diving was a beautiful kelp forest. And that was actually a new thing that happened in the 70s. And it was thanks to the abalone divers that went here and removed all these abalone. It was a lot of abalone. They removed 5.4 million pounds of abalone in a single year. And that continued up until 1942 when abalone production went to zero. And that was because of the internment of Japanese citizens that were taking the abalone. So that bird went to other fishers, and those fishers were not as, didn't fish sustainably like the Japanese people did. They just took all of them, and they went from one species to the other until all the species became very rare, and we had to stop fishing for abalone in 1997 south of the Golden Gate. This is a navigational map, and this shows the kelp in Monterey Bay. The only kelp left is right there at present-day harbor. There's no other kelp on that map. That's 1850 to 1880. But what happened was, because the abalone divers went there and removed it, I'm sure you saw a lot of pictures of the abalone fishing that Tim has showed you, of the hard hat divers, and they are fishing for the abalone. But if you look at what's missing from the picture, it's the kelp. They are not swimming in the kelp forest because those abalone was eating that kelp, right? What's not in the picture is important sometimes. And this is a pile of abalone shells from Morro Bay. There are roads that are paved in abalone shells. There were so many abalone from this imbalance that had happened. And you can see that picture on the right, that is Point Lobos. And they put all the abalone out there to dry and salt them and send them overseas, a lot of it. But in the back is Whalers Cove in Point Lobos, and there's no kelp in that picture, right? That's just, you have to kind of think of these things being opposites. So, to summarize it, we had giant kelp forests, and they became urchin barrens. But where they started was at the Point Pinos, and then the urchins spread south into Monterey Bay and all the way down the coast, all the way to Morro Bay, 100 miles south. You know, so there was like a cluster, there was like a hot spot for the sea otter, for the sea urchin production. And another one up on the north coast too, that also happened. And they spread south, but these ones are spreading south from here. And the downside of that for us in Monterey is that these are all protected areas. These are marine protected areas where in the red ones you can't take anything, and in the blue ones you can't take any invertebrates. Well, then that protects the urchins from human intervention, like for us to go there and remove them. So I've been trying to get permission, right? This is what we do. And I've tried so many times, I'm not going to read all this to you, but I go back all the time to the Fish and Game Commission and ask to open up the California coast to us to be able to remove the urchins, use an airlift or to cull them with little hammers like we've been doing. And this is when I started in 2019 when I had short hair, back when I began this. And so I have the receipts, right? I've been trying hard to get this done. So this is what it looks like, and where this is right over here at the Del Monte Beach, where we were yesterday for the abalone dance. It's a great place, it's just a shale place, and there was a kelp forest when we arrived in 2021. We got permission from the state to remove the urchins with the hammers for 3 years on the site, and so we started doing that at this place, and this is when we arrived there. You can see this is not but maybe, yeah. So, this is where the kelp is right here. And this I'm going to draw your attention to this box. This is the frame of when the drone was flying over it. And then this is where it is now. So, well, not exactly now, but this is where it moved to. So we moved the kelp forest from there to here because we made this adult, and then the spores were over here in our cleared area, and we formed 11 acres of kelp on this place. This is from the drone survey. So our plan in the last year of our project was to keep pushing out. So what I'm trying to visualize here, this is kelp habitat, the 11 acres. We wanted to go over here and just keep pushing out against the swell and make more kelp forest. But then the state sunsetted our project. They said they thought it was just an experiment. We didn't think it was an experiment, but they just made us stop culling the urchins. And when they did that, when they sunsetted, this is about how it was at that time, about 2.3 acres of kelp remaining on the site. And then eventually it became like that. So the urchins just you're basically shoveling water. These urchins just keep coming back in, and if you don't stay up on it and keep removing them, they will just re-invade the space. And so this is only half an acre, and that's what we have now. So there's actually a scientific report that I'm an author of that report. It was done after 5 years of investigation, and this is a graph. The science people here really like graphs. So this is our graph. So kind of we started here with the urchins, and this green line is when we started culling urchins. And we brought, this is a control, where the control is another site where we don't go and remove urchins. It's just, we just count over there and not remove. That's the scientific method. You have to have a treatment area and a control area so you can tell people you had an effect on things. So on the control area, it stayed up high, the urchin count. And where we're on the treatment area, we reduce the numbers over here to lower numbers. These are purple urchins, red is something similar. But you can see we were calling, and then we stopped right here, and then these urchin numbers started creeping back up again, which is the dashed line here, until you reach this point over here, where there's more urchins on the treatment area than the control. You know, there's probably more urchins now than when we started because we stopped calling. The kelp is the other story, where we started out with no kelp, and then after a while we grew kelp on the site. In the second year we got a really good kelp forest, and then it kind of reduced a little bit right here. We stopped calling at this point, and then the kelp ended up going down. You see at the end it goes well, eventually it goes to zero over here. There's no more kelp on our treatment area. Not to worry. We have this new idea, and that is to make a regenerative fishery. So if you remove the urchins, the kelp will grow. We just proved that. So let's do more of that, and let's target the purple urchins as a fishery itself. So purple urchins are not really desired by the restaurants and stuff. They like the red urchins, which are bigger and they're full. But if you take a purple urchin and you put it into a ranching where you have a basket, you feed things to the urchins, they will reconstitute themselves in 12 weeks and become a remarkable culinary product. And that's what Melanie's really good at. She's my buddy here. She's with the community, Pacific Coast Community of Practice. And we're trying to figure out ways to sell urchins to restaurants, right? Like we can find some ways to do this. So in our project, we have 92 acres in this harvestable area, and that's our little kelp that remains. And we want to land them at the Monterey Abalone Company, somewhere you're going tonight. You can see what this facility is like. And then there's a ranching over here. So they can ranch them underneath the wharf, but there's also a barge up there. It's just like open baskets, and they put the urchins in there, and then kelp, and then they eat the kelp. They sell them for $6.50 wholesale to restaurants, and we got a million of them, right? We've got plenty. So, and then we can sell them at Fisherman's Wharf. The Fisherman's Wharf, they like them. They don't sell them. You know, you have to kind of grow the market, right? Get people used to eating urchins. They have to like it. People come to Monterey, they can have a tourist, here's your urchin. You don't have to like it, but you have to eat it. We got a million of them. So, and then we have a new way of doing it. So we had some time to go look around, and we went up north to Mendocino, and we met a guy named John Ohlone, and he invented an airlift, and he's been using this since 2018. And he said it's open source, so I went there and copied it, and I made one. And this is my barn, and I made the airlift right in front of it. So what it is the urchins are on the bottom here, and there's a rake. You have like this arm rake. I would have brought it today, but it's really big. Right? That's 10 feet high. And then you like push the urchins in front of the nozzle, and then they're breathing surface supplied air. So then the air goes into this little ring at the bottom, right here, and then it blows little bubbles. And the bubbles go up, and then the water goes with it. It's just physics. And it draws a vacuum. So you basically bring these urchins in front of the nozzle, and then whoop, they go up. The air goes out the top, and then the urchins tumble down into this basket. What's not shown here is there's lift bags at this point and at that point that support the whole thing, so it doesn't roll over in the water, right? And I painted it a little bit because when you're in the water, it's green like the water, and so you just run into it. It's just like bounce. And then you get a lot of urchins in a basket, and this is a bag full of urchin. This is about 300 pounds there. And we got a couple of them, and then we just kind of swap them out and bring these urchins back, man. The ones that are big, we will make them into culinary product. The ones that are small, we can make them into fertilizer. You may find that fertilizer in the future is worth more than the culinary product, just because you're handling things with a bulldozer instead of fingers, right? So this is culinary products that can be made from urchins, right? You can have them in the shell. I've also seen where they remove all the spines off the shell, so it's kind of easier for people to visually look at it. And then here's a tostada, and this is monies scallop toast. So that monies scallop toast sells for $32, right? So we can get our way out of this problem. It doesn't have to be a high-end meal either. It can be everyone's meal, and you can make butter out of it and all kinds of stuff. There are some policy changes. I wanted to kind of blow by these, but the California Ocean Protection Council has a policy of restoring 2,000 acres of kelp by 2030. So there's their plan. So the state's coming around a little bit to this idea that everyone's been telling them kelp, 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 and so they are going to be able to target them that way. There's also what they call the Kelp Restoration Management Plan, where they want to establish a permitting framework for people like me to come in and be able to work on these projects as a permit. And that could be coming out as late as soon as 2028 is when that plan could mature. There's also the statewide, MPA statewide leadership team, and they have a policy of being able to look at marine protected areas on a case-by-case basis to see if we can go in there and do restoration. Like I said, the urchins are in all of these protected areas and they are protected effectively from us, right? So, but they are able to use the statewide leadership team, which is full of state people, to be able to allow us to go into the ones that we're asking for. This is for an artificial reef program. So we have artificial reefs in our petition that I'm going to talk about. And they, there's a whole artificial reef plan that they can put these artificial reefs into these areas, and then we can grow kelp on the artificial reefs. There's also something called the Ocean Protection Council's 30 by 30 program. Well, this is an initiative, it's also a federal initiative called American Beautiful, but Governor Newsom declared by executive order that we would have 30 by 30. So 30% of the land and 30% of the ocean is to be conserved by 2030. And what that means is kind of anyone's guess. Like right now, they're just trying to figure out definitions of what's conserved and what's not conserved. But their goal is to have more areas that would be protected. And we are adding in our petition a little bit of more area and more higher levels of protection for these new protected areas. There's also the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. I was on the advisory council and I was the chairperson that we created an iconic kelp action plan. And the iconic kelp action plan has different actions that are done. One is to map, I guess, social values on these dive sites, what is valuable to people, and also be a repository for information about all things kelp so that we're not all accidentally studying the same thing, right? That we can spread it out and fill in knowledge gaps and not just kind of not. So that's the federal level. And so what's happening in Monterey Bay? So right now, we're losing all our kelp. It's too warm, right? There was a marine heat wave, and it changed things dramatically in 2014 to 2016. And that's when the kelp started to get lost. But it's warm again in the ocean. And we're finding since September that the surface has been in the 60s. And usually our diving temperature is 50 to 55 degrees. And for the last 6 months, it's been a real marine heat wave out there. And coming next is El Nino that's going to kind of stack on top of it. So it's really difficult for kelp to grow under those kind of conditions. And the kelp in Monterey Bay, South Monterey Bay right out here, was at 4% of baseline. And that was 2 years ago, and I think it's gotten worse since then. Kelp in Carmel Bay, so much better, 6.3% of our baseline in Carmel Bay. But the kelp is actually transitioning, and the satellite pictures don't really evaluate that. What they consider is any dot on the water is kelp, but there are different species of kelp. One is an annual, which is bull kelp, and the other is a perennial, which is giant kelp. And what we're seeing is that the urchins eat the perennial giant kelp and leave nothing, and then they'll move on, and then bull kelp will form in the absence of the urchins. So what we're seeing is all our kelp forests transition from giant kelp to bull kelp, and the reason why is because the urchins they ate the giant kelp, and now they're in there with all the annuals. But think of an annual like looking at geese in the field, but it's kind of like a meadow, right? There's animals can live there and graze on grass, and grass will just grow faster than anything could possibly eat it. And if they do eat it, it'll grow again next year, right? Like it's not like a giant kelp. A giant kelp strategy is like I'm just going to grow faster than anything could possibly eat me, because it can grow 2 feet in a single day, right? So that's a different survival strategy, and that survival strategy is what carried it for millennia in this area where we had sea otters, giant kelp, and very few scared abalone urchins in these waters. The southern sea otter population is declining. The U.S. Geological Survey is responsible for counting the southern sea otter, and they have not given us a census since 2019. So we really don't know how many are out there. We know the last census they were declining 3 years in a row, and there was 3,000 of them at that time, but and this is going to be my personal opinion because no one is giving the numbers on this, I think they're down quite a bit from that 3,000. And I say that because I'm crew on the beach operator too, and I'm out there every weekend, and I count the sea otters. So I know it's here, but they could be somewhere else. I don't know. Maybe they're all hiding in a cove somewhere. It's just hope, right? So that's a real problem because we need them. They're the apex predator, and we have to reestablish this balance and then have more sea otters on it, and then we'll have that balance again. But we don't know what the numbers are. Eventually there will be a reckoning when the sea otter population and the kelp have reached this equilibrium where there's enough carrying capacity of sea otters in that kelp forest. And the sea otter, like I said, they have a voracious appetite. They eat a quarter of the body weight every day. So you need a lot of food, and it takes up 1.5 square miles of area to feed a single sea otter. And we have room for maybe half a sea otter out here with the kelp that we have. Okay. I'll let the U.S. Geological Survey give us an announcement, but I've been asking them for about a year and a half now, and they have not given us an answer. And it's just been too hot, and also we have agricultural runoff pollution, right? So back in the day, there was a sardine fishery here, and they found it was cheaper to make the sardines into fertilizer than to put them in cans. So a lot of this fertilizer ended up in Salinas Valley, and it was fertilizer. Well, now that's coming back down the river, and it's green. It's a lot of nitrate pollution, and that nitrate pollution goes right into our bay. And if you dive in Monterey, you know it's very green in Monterey Bay. And Carmel, it's clear water. And the reason why is because of all that nitrate runoff coming into the bay, turning green, blocking sunlight, making it warmer for us. We get deep water upwelling too, and then that just comes up with lots of good nutrients in it, and it turns green. So we're fighting greenness here, and so then our project for kelp restoration is now involving stopping nitrate runoff from the Salinas River. It means making biosoils and other $1 million projects that needs to be done to solve this all of ecosystem problem. So they did a study to see where would be the best place to restore kelp. And this was done by UC Santa Cruz and UC Santa Barbara, and they created this map. They put dots all over it. Where the red dots are is the highest priority of where we think kelp can come back. And so we're trying to go to the places that have the highest chance of success. And that is these places like Suquilta, SMR, Ed Ricketts, SMCA, and Pacific Grove, Carmel Bay, State Marine Conservation Area, and Point Lobos, which doesn't have any dots on it for some reason. I don't know why I skipped that one, but that's a highly desirable spot, and everyone loves Point Lobos. But it's been just denuded of species because of all these urchins that have come in there. And I was talking with Tim, maybe Tim can tell the story, but like he was saying how the Alma divers came back to Point Lobos and dove in 2009, is that correct, 2009? And they thought that in 2009 that it was just a dead zone. I think that's the words he used. And my experience in 2009, I thought it was pretty good, but you should see it now. Like, it just made me cry. It's just so devastating to see these beautiful places just blanked out. So in those places where we want to do the work, that's the acreage of them. We want to go and do the urchin work in these areas first, and that constitutes 2,410 acres, which is 410 acres more than the state's goal. Things like we're really aligned if we can just get started. And one of the things we want to do is make them these state marine conservation areas into state marine reserves. Because fishing doesn't really help if someone's taking functioning parts of the ecosystem away in what is kind of a default scientific experiment to see if this is going to work. Adding that fishing pressure is not helpful. It's easier just to prohibit it. And so that's what we want to do as part of our petition, is to prohibit these areas and make it kind of the parks people call red all around. That there's no fishing all around this peninsula. You can fish further out from shore, and it's fine, you know. But just in the kelp forest. Don't fish in the kelp forest, basically what we're saying. And what we want to do is with ourselves and Recheck, go and do all of these activities to help kelp. Culling urchins. They have little hammers, so we go around with a hammer and you cull the urchin with a little hammer. You can get a lot of them in a single dive, between like 1,500, 2,000 urchins in a single dive. And it works out really well. And the fish eat all the things you cull, right? It doesn't go to waste, it goes right back into the system. The other thing you can do is to actually collect them, which is very time consuming. And that's what they're doing in a lot of places up north. We want to be smart about it. Bait and trap the urchins. Like, why should I go chase the urchin? Right? Why can't it come to me? Just put something in a trap and have the urchin come in the trap, and then we haul out the trap. Get rid of the urchins. Reset it, put it back down, right? Fishermen don't run around with a hook, you know. Be smart about it. We also want to have commercial harvest of the purple urchins as a regenerative fishery, and I showed you that airlift. We want to have more commercial fishers in it. You have to pay money for fishermen. It's a business thing for them. It costs money for them to do the work. But once that becomes the fishery, then it can go on and on and on. We want to manage acid weed. One of the effects of all this is that when you have giant kelp and it's removed by urchins, and then you remove the urchins, the next thing you get is acid weed. It's something that grows, it's an annual, it has a pH of 2.6, very acidic. Urchins eat it, not good for them, it dissolves their teeth. But there's a lot of it. So if you can kind of manage that as a strategy, where you put it on the inside, and so when the urchins try to come into your kelp forest, they eat that first. It can buy you time to get the urchins that are actively grazing on the kelp. We want to remove invasive species. We have invasive species here in Monterey. We have water cypra subcortata. It's an invasive rhizome. We're finding more and more of that. We are in fear of Sargassum horneri coming into this place. It was found on June 4th of 2020 at the Breakwater Wall, and it's around. The spores for it are here waiting for the right conditions. And if we have warm water, like we're going to see warm water, we could get an outbreak of this Sargassum horneri, which is just awful. It's just this weed that stands 6 feet high, and you can't really swim through it very well. Nothing likes to live in it. Yeah, it's toxic to everything. So that's happened in Southern California. That's why I know so much about it. I dove there. But we could have it here in Monterey Bay, and so we've got to be on the lookout for that, have a rapid response. We see it, we go get it, pull it out, and don't let that take over. We want to manage also kelp planting and transplanting, so introducing kelp back into the places after we've cleared them. It's a little more controversial. Like, what species of, where are you going to get the kelp, right? Like, we want to go to giant kelp, but like some giant kelp can survive in warm water. Some of it is down south in Mexico, where it's like, how did it ever survive? I mean, it's 80 degrees there, right? Let's get that kelp and bring it up here and introduce it here. First, do it sterile so they don't but see what survives. And what survives, maybe we can have more of that in the future. We also want to manage the kelp canopy by pruning it. It's a little bit odd to say that you prune the kelp and make the kelp better, but that's the way it works with kelp. They've always known this, that if you prune the kelp canopy, it makes more sunlight go to the bottom, and that sunlight at the bottom makes it reproductive, makes it throw up another spike. When it cuts that canopy, the canopy on this for 4 or 5 months, and then it throws up another canopy piece. And so that's why it's such a sustainable product to keep harvesting. And you'll see tomorrow, or later today, the Abalone Company harvests kelp. They have one of the rare permits, and they harvest 6,000 pounds of kelp a week to feed to the abalone that are living underneath the dock. There's 300,000 abalone living there. And for the first time in their history, they're finding they're running low on kelp, and they have to go up to Santa Cruz and get kelp from there and bring it back to the effort. And suspend the fishing in the marine protected areas until we get the kelp up and established, then we can consider going back into there. If they can prove that fishing helps I'll be all for it, but I don't think the evidence is there yet. How are we doing? Tommy,
I think we're getting close, yeah.
getting close, okay. So artificial reefs are also in our project, and they're kind of cool because they float on top of sand. And we want to also, in our petition, allow a special way to go in into this scientific collecting permit, and go in there and do kelp restoration through that permit, and also allow something for indigenous people. So they should be able to have a permit process themselves and not try to make exemptions in all of these places in order to suit their ceremonial and subsistence fishing. It's de minimis and make its own process. And so this is our petition. We can fish as we are right now and taking 35 urchins per diver per day on the fleet. Or they have commercial airlift. That's a way to do it by fishing. The other way is to do it by the permit, and we're also applying for it that way. And that's all.
Thank you so much. Keith is going to be outside with his informational booth, the Giant Kelp Restoration Project. Please spend some time going out and seeing him. We have a couple minutes here before Joe is going to be coming up to talk about his book, Tin Can Coast. So I want to give you a couple minutes. If you'd like to get up, stretch your legs. Also wanted to remind you that our museum downstairs is open. If you go right around, it's an incredible museum. Please take a look. Also, if you love what you see down there and are interested, we are always looking for more volunteer docents. So if you'd like to learn all about it and volunteer, we're always looking for some more hands on that. So we're very excited to have Joseph Ogilvie here, who is a writer and chef. After graduating from Oxford University, he spent several years working in restaurants in London and Texas while writing on his days off. His experience in kitchens led him to research involving the tangled human and ecological history of food. His new book, Tin Can Coast, traces the relationship of California and its ocean through the story of 4 marine animals: sea otters, sardines, tuna, and abalone. Please join me in welcoming Joe to the stage.
So yes, Ron, thank you for coming, and thank you to Tommy for the introduction, and to Tim for inviting me, and everyone at JACL Hall for hosting this. I'm really happy to be back in Monterey and to be back in JACL Hall. Monterey and the Hall were very important parts of doing the research for this book, and it's very exciting to be back, be kind of sharing the things I learned from it, and it's also very exciting to be up here speaking alongside a lot of the people that ended up inspiring the book. Tim Thomas's book Tim was very helpful. The White Abalone Project, the Monterey Abalone Farm kind of played into the research and the writing of the book. And so, Tin Can Coast is, in short, it's a kind of, it tells the story of California and its ocean through history, and how California and the people of California shape the ocean and impacted the ocean and its inhabitants. And this was about how the ocean and its inhabitants kind of impacted the people of California and the state, and that kind of into connections. And it tells it through these four marine creatures and people that followed them, so people that hunted them or pursued them, so sea otters, Russian fur hunters, sardines in Monterey and Canary Row days, and then tuna in San Diego, and then abalone, and many kind of communities throughout California's history that depended on abalone. So, kind of, in honor of the JACL Hall and the Abalone Fest, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Japanese-American abalone fishery, like right here in Monterey, particularly its origins and kind of its rise to being one of the major fisheries in Monterey's history, kind of both economically speaking and and culturally speaking. So first I'm just going to read a little kind of short section from the book that kind of gives a kind of sense of what the book's about, what it's looking at, and those kinds of things. So this is a little section about a Japanese hard hat diver. Picture a Japanese diver and his crewmates on a small boat off the sea cliffs of Big Sur. They're preparing for the pursuit of a Miriam snail, who defies man's nets and traps and challenges him to a hand-to-hand encounter at the bottom of the sea, as one excitable essayist who described the fishery as Scribner's Billet. In the half-light of the early dawn, the diver pulls on a second pair of woolen long johns and steps into a rubberized canvas dive suit. He slips his feet into a pair of lead boots, 18 pounds each. His crewmates lay a metal breastplate over his shoulders, screw him into his dive helmet, and load him down with weights. Once he's added about 100 pounds or so, he begins to fall gently to the seafloor. An abalone pick in one hand, a basket made of an old Starkey barrel hoop and cord netting in the other, an air hose and a lifeline his only ties to the surface. To descend, he opens an exhaust valve on the back of his helmet, letting the air rush out so the dive weights can pull him down. Crewmates in the boat take shifts, working the heavy brass pumps, keeping tired arms from interrupting the flow of air. Divers complain because the best available oil for greasing the pumps was California olive oil, which gave the air a strange, grassy taste. Efficient abalone diving meant balancing the need for air against buoyancy. Divers tried to keep as little air in the suits as possible, just enough to keep breathing, so they could stay low and maneuver without fighting their suit's desire to float back to the surface. A good sign was feeling the water pressure squeeze against their legs and stomach. To keep the air balance right required constant adjustments. The only way to control it was for a diver to tap a little plunger inside his helmet with the back of his head, releasing the air in a spray of bubbles. The boat crew would follow the trail of surfing bubbles above to keep above him. Once our diver is breathing safely, lead boots firmly planted on the seabed, he begins stalking slow motion through the sea kelp forests, lit only by the little sunlight that penetrates the murk. The English language doesn't have a good word for the mode of submarine locomotion used by the abalone divers. It hasn't adapted to the strange half-gravity of the underwater world. The diver walks at a 45-degree angle to the seafloor, his helmet a yard off the bottom, striding at half speed against the water resistance. He'll cover anything from 1 to 8 miles on this diagonal. As far from the perpendicular, he doesn't have to fight the current so hard and can avoid being entangled in the kelp. He can keep his footing on the boulder-strewn bottom and might be able to see the almost invisible abalone through his 4-inch helmet porthole and what remains of the light filtered through the water and seaweed. Divers try to sneak up on their prey, sliding their irons under the abalone's shell before it has a chance to clamp down, then jerking upwards to release the snail, their movements muffled and distorted by the water in the sea. For every dozen or so abalone popped from the rocks, the diver's basket was hauled up to the ship's deck and an empty one lowered back down. If the diver had no luck with one kelp bed, they would often just walk to another, the dive boat sculling behind to keep up with the rising bubbles. A good 5-day trip could see 150 to 200 baskets of abalone making their way to the surface, 1,800 or more sea snails. So that's it owes a lot to Roy Hattori, Tommy's grandfather, and interviews that Tim collected with him. That's a kind of composite portrait of a hard hat diver, a Japanese American hard hat diver on the coast, working on the coast in the 1920s and 1930s. But it's a kind of, to go back to the origin of the story, we're going to move back to just before the end of the 19th century, to kind of get a sense of where it comes from. And so, yeah, around this period, there was a Chinese American abalone fishery that kind of preceded the Japanese fishery, and around this time it was in its kind of terminal years, it was in its final terminal decline, kind of end of almost 40 or 50 years of this fishery, and it had closed down more or less due by racial discrimination, a mix of high-level federal regulations, the 1880 Exclusion Act that kind of banned Chinese migrants from entering the country, and also a mix of kind of racially targeted conservation bills. And so the combination of those two things had really squeezed the Chinese abalone fishery, and was really, it was on its way out. The remaining divers were getting older and older, and it's harder and harder for them to make it work. But there was still a lot of abalone. There was the Chinese fishery had been relatively restrained, and more importantly, it only really focused on the black abalone, which intertidally. They live in rock pools and exposed at low tide. They're easy to kind of go out and harvest. Deeper offshore, red abalone were they basically been untouched. And been untouched since the sea otters had been more or less ecologically wiped out. Almost 80 years before we had by the time gold rush there were no more otters. And so since that time, the red abalone had been growing, getting bigger and bigger. And so once as the Chinese were kind of excluded from California and excluded from the United States in general, it was very often Japanese migrants that came and took the roles that were vacated or left over. And this included the abalone fishery. So there's a very long tradition of abalone diving and abalone eating, I guess, in Japan. The ama are, you may have seen the female free divers that still work today and swim out and gather abalone or oysters from the seafloor. And so there's this long tradition, but those, the abalone beds in Japan, the abalone are much smaller, and they've been heavily fished for a very long time. And so when, forgive if I get the pronunciation on Otasaburo Noda, who was kind of one of the fathers of the Japanese abalone fishery here. He was walking on the coast, and he noticed that there was, I think as he put it, the shoreline was carpeted with abalone. It was kind of bonanza, but more of them and bigger shellfish than you'd ever seen before. And so he was, kind of blown away by this. It's like, walking into, I don't know, finding bounty of black truffles kind of at the park kind of thing. And so he started setting up a dive. He sets up his own kind of operation to try and kind of dive for these. And he also writes to the Japanese government. The Japanese government dispatched a man called Genosuke Kodani to basically kind of work out what's going on with all these abalone. And Kodani arrives. He's a graduate of the Tokyo Fisheries School. He's from an abalone diving family, and he arrives in Monterey, and kind of almost immediately he realizes what he's walked into, this huge bounty of abalone just kind of sitting there on the coast. So he writes, within months, he's got divers from back home in Japan working, kind of holding on to these sake barrels floating in water and diving down to grab the abalone and bring them up. And you can see, it's kind of amazing, you can see some pictures and some of the artifacts of it in the museum here. These amazing handmade goggles that I never would have imagined in 1898. But the problem is the water off Monterey was much colder than the water off Japan, and so it was kind of, it wasn't really possible to free dive abalone on a commercial scale. It took too long to kind of get into the dive, they had to go back into the boats and light fires to try and kind of shiver, kind of warm up. And it just took too long. And so this is when Kidani kind of moves, his next move for this is he sends for a diving suit, for a hard hat diving suit. And this is kind of the moment that it really picks up for the industry. You can, as I mentioned in the piece, the divers, hard hat diver can spend hours down there just hauling up, sending up abalone, basket comes down, abalone go up, basket comes down. And that kind of, it really changes the industry. The industry becomes much bigger scale. And this hard hat diving was kind of a competitive advantage for the Japanese abalone fishery at the time, but even going on much longer. Japan, very surprising to me, was kind of the world leader in hard hat diving technology at the time. And it's kind of, it was a huge competitive advantage against everyone else that kind of was involved. And so, around this point, the industry's kind of taken off. Kidani sets up a kind of a fishing or diving and processing camp. You saw a picture of it in our talk just now, at Waves Cove. And it's named, becomes known as Kidani Village. But the thing about Kidani Village, despite being named after it, Kidani, he didn't own it. At the time, Japanese people, Japanese Americans in California weren't eligible to own property. And so he hands up his business partner, white business partner, A.M. Allen, on paper was the titular owner of the business and the property. And this kind of brings us on to what was really the main challenge for the Japanese abalone fishery, which was, rather than being cold water or lack of abalone to fish, it was racial discrimination, direct racial discrimination. And this was kind of happening on almost every level of government, from kind of federal level to the diplomatic level. So in 1907, the so-called Gentleman's Agreement ended Japanese migration to the US, but it also goes all the way down to kind of municipal and county level, and in particular kind of conservation and environmental levels. So in Monterey they banned fishing, abalone diving north of the Carmel River. And so besides the Carmel River ban, there are many other kind of very specifically targeted, kind of racially targeted conservation laws and regulations. There's a different high price the license fees were more expensive for Japanese divers than they were for white divers. There are restrictions on where and when one could dive for abalone, and the size of them. And this is kind of the same. It's kind of the same campaign that was waged against the Chinese abalone fishery. And it's one of these strange things about California fishery history, and I think in general fishing history, is how much these kind of stories very often repeat, and there'll be one fishery will kind of arise from the wreckage of another. And there's also, I just kind of want to pause on this idea of, basically say kind of conservation as an exercise in power, or kind of use in power. And I think, since one of these I kind of got from it was this idea that every act of conservation is a kind of manifestation or an incarnation of a vision of the human and natural world, and how they should be interacted, how they should be structured, what should be allowed, what should be forbidden. And in this case, it was a rather like unpleasant or bigoted vision there. But I think having that sense that conservation is is a use of, is an exercise in power and a use of power, I found really kind of illuminating, thinking about how to go on, how to move forward with things like preserving our oceans, restoring kelp forests. But just returning to the story, Kidani and Alan were actually pretty successful in pushing back against this legislation. They managed to secure work visas for their divers. They kind of got exemptions and so on. But it cost quite a lot in time and effort and energy. But the fishery kind of managed to keep growing despite the kind of challenges it was facing. And then until 1914, when the California legislature banned the export of abalone from the state entirely. Suddenly, China and Japan, which had been main markets for these abalone firms, were cut off. They could sell to Japantowns and Chinatowns in the state, but that was a sort of saturated market. And the only other buyer really was a man called Ernest Pop Dolter. Pop Dolter, who's Tim has written an excellent biography of, I recommend. He's a chef, and but more than a chef, he's a kind of showman. He wears chef whites all the time. He's got fairs. He had a dancing bear for a pet at one time. And he's a sort of kind of publicity hound as well as being quite a chef. And he invented a way of cooking abalone essentially like schnitzel. Hammer it, run it in egg wash, and then in breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs, then you quickly pan fry it. And it was quite popular. People liked it around the town. But there's only, at this point, there's only so many abalone schnitzels you could really sell. It was a bit of a niche taste. And then, this is this very strange quirk in California history. until the Panama Canal was finished. And when the Panama Canal was finished, there was a World Fair in San Francisco to celebrate. And at the World Fair was Pop Dolter. And the eyes of the world were on the fair, and the eyes of the world were on Pop cooking the most quintessentially Californian dish you think of, which was abalone schnitzel. And so in this kind of strange way, suddenly this people know about it. People in California are asking about, do you have this? Do you have abalone schnitzel? And there are kind of copycats come up and down the coast. Pop's got much more buying power, and so this market has been kind of created at exactly the moment when the market for the Japanese abalone fishery had been created, just at the moment when it had been when the former markets had been closed down. And at this time, the Japanese divers are the only ones kind of capable of supplying and maintaining basically catching abalone at anything like a kind of commercial scale, because they're hard, because they're so much better at diving. It's a history of knowledge that the technology of the diving suits is much better suited to it. And at the same time, what Pop kind of he releases these ads describing himself as the discoverer of abalone as a white man's delicacy. And it's kind of, and I think there's this kind of moment where, and I think this moment is the kind of, is this sort of very kind of crucial moment in the story of the abalone fishery here, which is that this simultaneously the moment is, Pop and the abalone schnitzel were a kind of saviour for the community, but at the same time it kind of contained the seeds of the fishery and the industry's eventual downfall, essentially. By bringing it mainstream and by making it a kind of something that everyone in America by making it a white man's delicacy, it kind of brought on this wave of competition and this wave of attention and this wave of intensified legislation and anti-Japanese discrimination. Okay, so the rest of the story of the fishery is in my book, is in Tin Can Coast. There are also a lot of very fascinating details in Tim's book, The Abalone King of Monterey, which I highly recommend. But I just wanted to kind of point out one more interesting aspect to this, which is this. To me, this idea that kind of the ocean ends up acting as a provider or a refuge for a community and for people. So, to me, it's kind of quite moving and quite powerful that one mollusk, one gastropod, in combination with skill and hard work and technology, kind of creates the foundation for a kind of vibrant and flourishing community at a time when it was very difficult. And it did so well that I think I'm right in saying it built this hall that we're standing in now. Anyway, so thank you very much for listening, and if anyone has any questions or if Tommy wants to take over.
So Joe actually has a couple copies of his book available for sale. If you are interested in them, just touch base with me. All right, so for our final group's presentation, we are very excited to have the White Abalone Captive Breeding Program. We have Isaac Trevino, is a UC Davis Staff Research Associate with the White Abalone Culture Lab. He has worked for over 10 years in the shellfish industry across the California coast in oyster farming, abalone aquaculture, and abalone conservation. As a member of the White Abalone Culture Lab, he works to improve white abalone reproduction via captive breeding at the Bodega Marine Laboratory. Joining him is Colleen Burge, who is a research scientist supervisor at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, who runs the Shellfish Health Lab at the Bodega Marine Laboratory. Colleen is the California State Shellfish Pathologist and provides healthy outcomes for the White Abalone Captive Rearing Program. Please join me in welcoming Isaac and Colleen.
positive story about abalone. So we've already heard a bit about North American abalone distributions, but I think I will just go back over it again. So there are multiple species of abalone across the Pacific coast of North America. And some of them have quite wide ranges, and some of them also have ranges that actually start or stop from point of conception, such as our white abalone, which is this one right at the edge with the narrowest range. We've already learned today that the white abalone are the deepest abalone species, and they were also the last fish abalone species for this reason. Most of these species are species of concern or threatened in their areas where they live. In particular, the black and white abalone are listed on the U.S. endangered species list. We're here today because of the wonderful Hattori family inviting us, and we're really happy to be here to talk about the white abalone. Maybe someday it'll be Haliotis hattoria, we hope. So it's no secret to any of us in the room that abalone are ecologically, culturally, and economically important. We've all heard this today, but it's important to remind us of all of this context. As a second-generation Californian and second-generation abalone biologist, I know this very well. All species of abalone decline, and we heard bits and pieces of this and others' talks, but this graph really depicts nicely first the Japanese fishery, and then the commercial fishery, and then the downfall of the commercial fishery. And this is a fact that I've known my entire life, but I feel like sometimes we have to remind ourselves of this context. The commercial fishery closed in 1997, and the recreational fishery up north of San Francisco closed in 2018. While I work for CDFW, I do not manage fisheries, but I can tell you that we need much better ocean conditions to support our abalone, and we need to be able to restore some of these species, such as the white abalone. So white abalone were pushed to the brink. So there was a very small bit of abalone left. So we lost greater than 90% of the animals in less than a decade of fishing. So some of our very smart scientists got together and said, the white abalone are too far from each other to reproduce as broadcast spawners. The thing that makes the most sense is to bring them into captivity. So in 2000, 17 white abalone were collected from Catalina Island, and they were following this. They were ESA listed with the first successful spawn at University of California, Santa Barbara. Unfortunately, 2 years later, they died of a fatal wasting disease. So in this fatal wasting disease, which is something that we still study in the lab, basically the abalone digestive system stops working and they're unable to digest their food, so they digest their foot and they wither and they die. So there were several years of unsuccessful spawning events. However, the program moved to the UC Davis Bodega Marine Lab, in large part because my predecessor, Dr. Jim Moore, was at the lab, and because of the really nice clean water at the Bodega Marine Lab, the ability to filter the seawater, to use UV, and also to treat the broodstock with a very successful treatment. So our abalone at the Bodega Marine Lab do not have the pathogen that causes withering syndrome. And in 2012, a program was born when the first successful abalone spawn happened in nearly a decade. And our captive production has improved significantly. Here we have year on the x-axis from 2012 to 2025, and the number of year-old abalone in the program. And we did have a steep increase up to the year 2000, and then a decline due to COVID-19, and we're starting to trickle back up. I will say this drop-off here is probably, we have a lot of really nice immature eggs in 2025. However, 2026 has been phenomenal. Isaac and I were chatting about this, and the 6-month numbers are sort of unprecedented. So we have over 30,000 animals at BML, and right down the road from us at Moss Landing Marine Lab, there's about 20,000. at about 6 months of age. So hopefully, this will help us to get to the point where we're increasing the program by 10x to meet our restoration goals. So I just wanted to give some context. This is the main culture lab at UC Davis Culinary Labs, the White Abalone Culture Lab. It is about half the size of this room, and it houses more white abalone than anywhere else in the world. And for context, these are where all of our babies live in these troughs. Over here on the right are our wild broodstock, and in the back we have some other broodstock animals. So we are really doing the best we can with the resources that we have, but fortunately we also have 12 partners spread across the state that are able to take animals when we fill up our facility. So this is just a typical spawn at the Bodega Marine Lab where we have our core team, so you see Isaac and I both in this photo, as well as volunteers and folks from other partner facilities. Our director, Alyssa, is right here. My boss, who retired last week, is right here. I'm not sure how happy he was to be dragged from Sacramento. I'm going to let Isaac take it.
Okay, so for our program, we take what we call like a two-pronged approach to restoration. So the first part happens at Bodega Marine Lab and with our partners, and that's the actual production of white abalone. So we're spawning wild white abalone, producing happy, healthy babies, and bringing those to our outplanting team, who then takes those back out into the wild. So here you see divers with a lot of cages. So they did some research on different types of cages for abalone release. And then these are kind of the modules that they use now. So they bring the abalone down, open the cages after about a week once the abalone are acclimated, and then the abalone crawl out, find their little hiding spots in the rocks, and about 7 years later they might start emerging from those rocks and being more adult abalone that you're used to seeing. I'm going to be focusing mostly on the first part of restoration, as that's what we do up at the Bodega Marine Lab. So one big program goal for us is to produce juveniles to keep pace with outplanting needs. So on the right side, or on the right side of the image here, my right, we have some abalone with their eggs after we induce spawning. And then on my left, we have one of our old technicians holding a bunch of abalone that are about a year old. And just briefly, I want to show you the abalone life cycle, because a lot of people don't know what an abalone really is. So they are gastropods, they're marine snails, but they do have a 1-week larval stage. So I don't know if you all visited our booth outside, we have a white bucket there, really boring looking bucket. I saw a lot of people look inside, nothing in there, but you can imagine a lot of larvae floating around in there. So we keep our abalone alive for about a week in that floating stage. Then they metamorphosize and settle at about a week old, and then from there they're just growing on the substrate in the abalone shape that you can imagine today. So in order to spawn the abalone, we need to make sure that they have really high quality gonad tissue and are actually able to produce gametes, sperm and eggs. So that starts with feeding them. Typically abalone love to feed on kelp, but there's also been research into some more protein and antioxidant rich algae such as dulse, a red algae, that are associated with gonad production in white abalone. So here's a video again of the lab that Colleen showed you, and here is some abalone getting fed that red algae. A lot of this red algae is actually cultured at Moss Landing Marine Labs and sent up to us at the lab. So then the next step in producing abalone babies is actually inducing the spawning in the abalone. So we have a spawning season from about January to March. We're looking at the abalone tissue, trying to determine when they're what we call ripe, when we see enough gonad tissue there. And then we induce spawning by giving them what we call a love potion. And that's a hydrogen peroxide bath that they sit in. They sit in that bath for about 3 hours, and then we switch them over to fresh filtered seawater. These protocols are used by abalone farms such as Monterey Abalone Company and the cultured abalone. We hold them at a constant temperature. Like Tommy mentioned, it's a long process. Sometimes we're there 12, 14 hours spawning these abalone, and then we collect the gametes, mix them together, and produce some abalone babies. And here is a video of what that spawning looks like. This is a female. And you can see there she's pushing out probably tens of thousands of eggs. And so a lot of effort is required for the spawning process, and that's one reason we really want to make sure our abalone are happy and healthy going into this. And so once the eggs are fertilized, this is kind of what the larval stage of abalone looks like. You can see they're kind of swimming around that bottom part. Let's see, this is that abalone foot, the part that people are used to eating. This is the abalone shell, but this is still pretty early in the larval stage. Then if you move on a little bit later, so this is again the foot, you can kind of see the epipodia, all that skirt that you're used to seeing on an abalone sticking out. Those are starting to develop here. And then here's an abalone that has metamorphosized and settled. So these are the cephalic tentacles, those big long tentacles sticking out of the abalone's head there. It's crawling around, its foot is underneath it, and this is its shell starting to develop here. And I'm going to hand it back over to Colleen.
So Isaac talked about the first goal being production, and the second goal is maintaining health of captive white abalone, and this means lots of things that these pictures sort of depict. Some of the processes we go through. It looks like I'm pretty excited here. This must mean that one of the health exams from one of our facilities is passed. But really what providing healthy outcomes means is frequent examinations of broodstock. For example, in a couple weeks, we're going to go through all of our broodstock and check their shell condition, check to make sure that they don't have any signs of their foot shrinking, all that sort of things. If you were out at the table, you may have seen a shell that had some white stuff on it. It's an epoxy treatment that we've been using to treat Cleona. It's a boring sponge that has been particularly problematic in our older white abalone. So we still have wild white abalone in our lab. We also monitor pathogens at all of our partner facilities. So we monitor for the pathogen that causes withering syndrome at our 12 partner facilities. We do pre-outplant health exams. So brothers and sisters of every cohort that goes in the ocean pass through our lab, and since the program has been outplanting since 2019 and I started my position in 2021, that means I've looked at nearly every outplant of white abalone into state waters. We can use quarantine or treatment when needed, and we are also conducting research to find health solutions. Probably the biggest goal of the program, though, is to improve captive production. And one of the issues we have is that white abalone aren't as easy to spawn as red abalone. Whether we're missing a Q, whether there's an algae we're missing since they're growing so deep, we're not sure. But Lauren, pictured here, has been using ultrasound as a non-invasive way to look at gonad development, and also looking at things like changing the photoperiod. Do they need more or less hours of light? We've been doing most of our spawns the last, I think, 3 years at nighttime, so that seems to help us get more animals that are happy to spawn. We've also been using sperm cryopreservation, so I also supervise the fisheries genetics lab that does all of the cryopreservation for salmonids in the state, and we have been using this for white abalone. What are we learning? Well, we can cryopreserve white abalone sperm. In fact, we have a few babies in our lab, and Moss Landing has a tank of animals that were from cryopreserved sperm right now. We know that the concentration matters. And why is this important? So oftentimes we get a lot of females spawning, but not males. So if we have this banked sperm, then we're able to use, sperm from males that may even not be part of the program. For example, some of you saw an abalone that we called Jeff, or Green 410. Well, he's no longer part of the program, but we have a sperm bank. So that will help to optimize crosses, improve genetic diversity, ensure spawning success. And perhaps even if someone pulls up a white abalone on the deck of a boat, we may be able to use cryopreserved sperm to fertilize. And I'm going to hand this back to Isaac.
Yeah, so in the future, we're looking at some more research options. We want to look at settlement queues in abalone. We're really concerned with growing our juvenile abalone as fast as possible to get them out into the wild before something can happen to them in the lab, and also so we have more space in the lab for new abalone. So one of those, what that looks like, Colleen kind of mentioned looking at different algae potentially, microalgae that are associated with settlement and growth. We're looking through kind of our programmatic data on which animals have spawned and maybe where they were collected, or we're bringing on a new scientist to look at the genetics of some of the abalone that have spawned and maybe what genes are associated with successful spawning. And like Colleen mentioned, we're also looking at photo period and all sorts of different things related to spawning season, potentially moon cycles, anything like that. And so a big part of our program is our partnerships and our collaboration. Colleen mentioned a few of the partners already. We work with Moss Landing locally. She runs the Fisheries Genetic Lab, so another CDFW lab. But here's a list of all of our partners statewide. We have California Science Center in LA. We have Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. One I want to point out here is CICESE. This is an aquaculture and science research facility down in Baja, California, so we even have international partners. White abalone's range does go into Mexico, so in order to fully restore the species, we need to restore it across the whole range, so we need to work with international partners. All of these partners fulfill very different roles for us, and it's really important that we have them all. So we have a map here of kind of where our partners are located. You can see we have 3 that are actually outside of the range. We talked a little bit about why we have white abalone up at Bodega Marine Lab, the great high quality seawater. We have the CDFW Shellfish Health Lab resource, so it's really important that we're up there. Moss Landing Marine Lab is a great resource for us. We talked about how we have 20,000 of our animals there right now. Monterey Abalone Company, a lot of our research has been is inspired by abalone farming, since they've been doing this since the 70s and we've only been doing this since 2001. And they're also a big source of feed for us because there's more kelp kind of available here, and they're always harvesting some to feed their animals. They provide us with kelp as well. Cultured Abalone Farm down in Goleta is one of our main grow out production sites. So because they have more acreage than us, they have more than a half of a room to fill abalone with. We work really closely with them. AOP is one of our primary education facilities, Aquarium of the Pacific down in LA. So if you want to actually go visit some white abalone, that's another great place to go. The Bay Foundation and NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Centers are our 2 primary outplanting partners. So they have the divers that are actually bringing our animals out to those secret sites in Southern California and outplanting the white abalone. And then again, I just want to mention that we have this international partner doing research down in Baja, California as well. And these collaborations aren't just on paper, aren't just on scientific research, but actually are interactions. So every time we spawn abalone, we send some of the larvae out to our different partner facilities, and some of those ended up at Moss Landing Marine Lab. But in order for them to leave Moss Landing, we needed to do what's called a subellive inspection for an invasive species. So we had to bring our lab back down here to inspect the animals before they can move. And then we have partners from the Bay Foundation drive up and pick up those abalone that have been inspected and take them all the way down south to their facilities and eventually out on the boat to outplant. So you can see we have 3, actually maybe 4 different partners, including the Shellfish Health Lab, involved in this one outplant here. So again, just these partnerships are really vital for us. And Colleen mentioned that we've only been outplanting since 2019. That's 7 years, and the outplanting was significantly decreased during COVID, so 2020, 2021. But since then, over 26,000 white abalone have been brought back into the wild. For reference, the estimates of the low abundance of white abalone when they were listed is about 2,000. So already we've done about 13 times that, and like Colleen mentioned, we need to be going at a rate of about 10 times more than that to actually achieve our restoration goals.
Good job, good job.
And there's just a couple take-homes I want you to kind of remember from today's talk. One is that white abalone, like all abalone species in California, are culturally, economically, and ecologically important. Captive production, outplanting, and research are actively saving the species. It's not an attempt, we are actively doing it. And that statewide and international collaboration are really key to our success and bolster the program as a whole. Thank you. Yeah.
So how long does it take for the white abalone to reach sexual maturity, and at what size are they usually when they reach that?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't think we know exactly an age for sexual maturity, and like so Colleen mentioned, we had really a lot of eggs and sperm produced in 2025, but if you saw the production chart, the actual production is lower, and because we had incompetent larvae. So we had those animals that were producing those were probably 5 or 6 years old, and because we got incompetent larvae, we think, okay, they're able to produce sperm, but probably realistically the sexual maturity is probably more like 8 to 10 years would be an estimate, yeah. And then there's a second part of the question.
What size are they when they're sexually mature?
I mean, it can vary.
It can vary widely. Even our little guys that are this big going out in the ocean, some of them have pretty significant gonads. I mean, when I look at the slides, it's, sorry, I said gonad. When I look at the slides, it's actually really surprising. Now, whether that means they actually reproduce, probably not.
Yeah.
What's the major source of your funding for this project?
So we are funded through the Federal Endangered Species Act, and that money goes through NOAA and then the state before it gets to us. That is on an annual cycle, and so we are funded currently, and we also have some other donors that kind of have been helping bolster this, and that's why it's important for us to have these partnerships across the state to have just some more security.
I had heard that abalone was one of the first species ever on the Endangered Species Act. Is that true?
So white abalone were the first marine invertebrate to be listed on the Endangered Species Act, and then the only other abalone on there is the black abalone, which came a few years later.
Part of the reason is that the way the Endangered Species Act was written, invertebrates have to be endangered throughout their entire range. So if you're used to hearing about specific evolutionary significant units of salmon, it's because vertebrates are treated differently. So some of the other species that I talked about, like the pinto abalone, are not endangered throughout their range. So it was a very big deal that the white abalone was listed at that time.
Yeah.
Have you had any follow-up outcomes on if the species is actually thriving in the planting sites?
That's a good question. So because we do just the production side, I don't have concrete data for you, but from what I've heard, so they are just now starting to see our first outplants emerging. So I mentioned that kind of 7 years is before they start to come out of their little cracks that they've been hiding in and are actually big enough to be out on the rocks safely. So we're just starting to see some of our first outplants out in the wild. We don't know necessarily, again, because we're putting them basically into a black box for 7 years. We're hoping to get some more data on that in the future. But there have been also some surveys that have seen juvenile white abalone that we didn't put out there out in the wild. So we know that maybe there is some spawning happening naturally. Yeah.
And the abalone, how do you identify?
We can't identify every single one. I think they're. So they are tagged, I think. They put like a little color paint on the back of the shell. So they're looking for those. They're looking really in the same sites, and I think they can use that as kind of a metric. Also, depending on how much growth of other, what we call epibionts, things growing on the shell, kind of can tell you if it's been down there for a while.
I think one of the technological advances in all ecological things are kind of those cameras that stay out there, right? To be eyes 24/7 in a location, to see the creatures in their habitats. Is there anything in the ocean like that equivalent to what's happening on land with like condors and cougars and things?
I think with the ocean, it's going to be a lot harder to have that, especially, I mean, I can mention that white abalone are the deepest dwelling species. So when our divers are going down there, it's already, those missions are very intense. They don't have a lot of bottom time to sort of set up. I think all of that technology would be a lot of work, and I don't know how long it would stay in the place that they want it to. These are pretty rough sites. Yeah.
I agree.
Oh yeah, one more, yeah.
So why isn't Embaria a part of that where they can take their robotics and go deep diving on the bottom?
I don't know, but I do know that NOAA does send divers down deep using rebreathers and that sort, and maybe even, I'm probably talking out my rear, but I believe they go out pretty deep with the technologies that NOAA has, but Embaria has not been a partner in the past.
I mean, I'm sure also it's pretty expensive to use that
Oh, yeah.
equipment. Yeah.
I know, but they're all research. They're you guys are in the same community, funded by Packard, you know? They should be able to. I approach them.
Yeah.
What is the depth you're talking about for the white abalones?
Typically, they're found between 50 and 180 feet. I mean, there are some that are in shallower. For example, we had a broodstock come in several years ago that I think she was only in 20 to 30 feet of water, but they're pretty deep. And most of the time, I know that when we talk to Melissa, she's talking about they're going down into these deeper caverns looking to see if they can find white abalone in places they haven't looked before, or going back to check on some that they've seen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Isaac and Colleen. I think one of my favorite parts about this festival is the different aspects and kind of the interdisciplinary nature that abalone brings us all together. You know, a lot of the stories yesterday were about the history of abalone and some of the stories this morning. And we're also able to see the current efforts that are going on. You may have noticed that a number of us are wearing Team White Abalone shirts. They do a fundraiser a couple times a year, I want to say. And so I'm sure this QR code probably goes to a link that would sign you up for any of those mailing lists.
And that's just to our website.
Just to the website? Okay, great. If you follow the Instagram, I know the Instagram does a great job. That's how I know. That's how we were able to get these shirts. They do different designs, normally once or twice a year, to help with some of those efforts, fundraising for their campaigns. So really exciting work that they're doing there. At this point, it is kind of reaching the conclusion of our official programming here at the JACL Hall. So I wanted to take a moment just to do a huge number of thank yous to the people that were involved in putting this all together. First of all, I would love to thank all of our presenters, the White Abalone Project, Keith with the Great Kelp Restoration, Joe is still here, all of our presenters yesterday, Tim Thomas who presented and co-hosted this entire event. Just a huge round of applause to all of them. I'd once again like to thank my parents for putting together the wonderful refreshment station in the back. My Auntie Ronco for coming out and helping with that as well today. I would love to do a huge thank you and shout out to my wife, Danielle, who is there in the back of the hall. In addition to having to put up with me and support me through all of this, she also did all of the artwork and advertising for this. So that poster, she hand-painted that poster for the festival and then digitized it to be able to be used in a number of different formats. So there are tote bags out front for sale that she hand silk screens for each one, and stickers that she designed. So thank you so much, Danielle. And thank you all of you for coming out and expressing interest, wanting to be a part of the community, wanting to learn more. So encouraging, all of the people that came out over the last 2 days. So exciting for us. We're already talking about what this festival is going to look like in the next year in 2027. If you want to look at your calendars, we're looking at pushing it a little bit earlier in the summer, maybe going to be the third weekend in July. It's kind of our hope on Saturday. We think we can condense the program down a little bit to make it a one-day event and not have to have it stand out for two. But we're also going to be looking at a number of different ways to make it more interactive. Again, I'm an experiential educator. I think we learn a lot from lectures and slideshows, and I gave a presentation with a slideshow today. And also, we need to get out and see. So I'm really excited. I hope you're able to stick around. At 1 o'clock, Tim is going to be leading a group on a little bit of a walking tour that's going to end up at the Monterey Abalone Company, who has offered to do some tours. Art was here yesterday. He's the owner of that company, so I hope you're able to take advantage of that. We also have a little bit of time here before that happens, so we really encourage you to take a look at our museum downstairs, the amazing museum that Tim has put together, our informational booths out front. There's lots of merchandise still available for sale, so really, really exciting things. Thank you all so much. The final thing that we like to do, Tim started this festival last year, and with it he felt that it was really important to give out an award, and he was very, very generous, and that he named it the Roy Hattori Memorial Award. And our goal with this award is really to celebrate someone in the community of Abalone that's doing incredible work. Last year we were able to celebrate and recognize Sandy Lyden, who's done incredible work here in the Monterey area with regards to history. He's a great, great friend of my grandfather. And so our goal is for every year to kind of highlight a program or an individual that is doing this amazing work. For this year, we've decided to highlight an organization that is doing incredible work in the field of abalone, really doing cutting edge research. You actually just heard a whole lot about it. So it probably doesn't need a whole lot of description after that, but we are very, very excited to award the 2026 Roy Hattori Memorial Award to the White Abalone Captive Brigade. I would love Tim to come up and my parents to come up and my sister to come up to help present this award. I would also love your entire team to come up. Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming out. Please visit the museum. Stick around for the 1 o'clock tour down to the White Abalone or the Monterey Abalone Company. They are not growing white abalones there.
Tim Thomas. I'm a fisheries historian. I researched the human history of the state for, believe it or not, for over 40 years. I was the historian curator for Monterey Maritime. Monterey's maritime history is their fishing history. You know, and the last 20 years of my work is mainly focused on the Japanese story, abalone in particular. And maybe you saw me yesterday. I'll bring it up again because I think it's so important. But I recently came to the conclusion, and I believe this wholeheartedly, that the abalone fishery in California is the most important fishery in the history of California. It wasn't economically, but it was culturally and historically. So this neighborhood we're now standing in was once a thriving Japantown. This building was built in 1926 by the Japanese Association, a group of Japanese businessmen, mostly all associated with the wharf and the fishing industries here in Monterey, mainly abalone. Abalone money literally built this building. Right here, right there. That's what brought the Japanese here to Monterey. Anybody's been on Cannery Row, and there's across from the aquarium, there's the open sea exhibit. There's a building there, I think there's a crate shop in there right now. It's next to the Wing Chong Market, right? Next time you go down and look at it, because it was just like this building, exactly. So when this building got built, it was built by the contractor and builder who was building the cannery down there, the Sea Pride Cannery, which was a Japanese-owned cannery, and they used the same blueprints for their office and warehouse for this building. This building was actually built in 2 months.
Wow.
It opened on May 2nd, 1926. Still standing, right? Great building. So I'm going to find just a couple of things as we move along. The ballpark across the street There's been a ballpark across that street since probably the 19-teens. Baseball, very important, not just the Japanese, but all of Monterey. As I mentioned, I've been doing this work a really long time, and you all know that Monterey is a small town. It still is a small town, but often, as I mentioned, this was a thriving Japan town, but oftentimes at holiday times, particularly, there, right across the fence line, there'll be a Sicilian fisherman, a Portuguese fisherman, and they exchange food across the fence line. Monterey is the only place that I have found where the fishermen had one union. In Southern California and Northern California, all the ethnic groups have their own separate unions. Monterey has one, and I think that was primarily because Monterey is a small town. These guys all grew up together, they all went to school together, but the real key was these boys all played baseball together right across the street in our ballpark there. And it wasn't uncommon for these young Japanese boys to learn to speak some Italian before they learned to speak English, and those Sicilian boys learned to speak some Japanese. Only see it here in Monterey. But the ballpark was different, so home plate, which is here, but it was actually on the other side. And anybody remember, we were all too young. I only know about it, but there was a famous ballpark in San Francisco called Seal Stadium. It looked like Seal Stadium, that's what it was. So here in the parking lot here, there was the Higashi Hotel. It was a traditional Japanese hotel, Japanese gardens, Japanese baths, had a Japanese restaurant. Many Montereyans had their first taste of Japanese food at the restaurant right here. Many Japanese had weddings in the garden that was here, and a lot of Japanese fishermen from Southern California would come up to Monterey to fish sardine. So the Monterey sardine season started on August 1st and went all the way to February 15th. In Southern California, with another large sardine fishery, actually it starts in October, and all the way to April. So many Japanese fishermen in Southern California would come up to Monterey, start fishing sardine here in August, and they could fish almost year-round. They would stay at the Higashi Hotel when they were up here. I'm sorry? When did it close? Closed. It was torn down, I believe, in the 1970s. The city wanted, when they built the sports center, they wanted to put this parking lot in here. And by the way, when they built the sports center, they also wanted to tear down the JACL Hall. But luckily, my good friend Ken Seedy, who was an architectural historian, was able to get a historic building, so we were able to save that building. Usually kind of walking through, look at about 10 people. So. We're starting, I give free walking tours on the first Saturday every month at the Monterey waterfront. And starting this month, on the third Saturday every month, we're going to give this tour, a bigger, longer version of this tour, and also a free tour. And you can sign up for those tours to the Monterey Library, actually. So some of you probably remember the Sunrise Market. Yes. So the Sunrise Market was actually the last place the Sunrise Market was here. But actually the market goes back to the turn of the 20th century. The original Sunrise Market was a couple blocks down that way in a little storefront. And then one time they were about over where the Bank of America is now. In that area, that's what it was. Then it ended up here, this spot here. And the Sunrise Market, of course, sold Japanese goods. But during the sardine days, during the fishing days, they also sold fishing supplies, netting, cotton to make netting, all kinds of different things like that, and things that you may remember from home, and that kind of stuff. So my assistant curator of our museum downstairs is a young woman named Chichiro Tabata, and she's a Kodani descendant, but she's also the descendant of the Tabata family that ran the Sunrise Market. So this is the home of Chichiro Watanabe, who was a Japanese abalone diver, came to Monterey. Also his father and son, both Watanabe, they're all from Chiba Prefecture, they lived in this house, you see right here. And I actually didn't bring it with me, but I have a newspaper article about the 4th of July parade in Monterey. I think it was about 1906. The article story was about Mr. Watanabe here. He went to the parade, 4th of July parade, and he was in the parade, and he was dressed full samurai regalia. It was all black. And it scared all the kids, everybody. it's just really cool. So I wish I don't know what happened to that cool view. Well, Watanabe was a very important diver along with his son during World War II. Of course, you know that story all at the camp. And because they were Japanese nationals, they couldn't own this property, right? But one of the Kodani's sons, who was still a teenager, took over the ownership of the house, and so, and then they turned it back over to Watanabe if they turned it. I won't go down it today, but the Presbyterian Church on the corner, also a Japanese Presbyterian Church, also opened the very same year as a JACL Hall, opened in October of 1926. The money was raised by the local Japanese community. We have in our collection a whole series of letters to a woman named Margaret White. And Margaret White was a Presbyterian missionary stationed in Carmel. She was there for about 1900, I believe into the 1960s when she finally died. And we have all these letters written to her from the local Japanese community, starting about 1900. So we get all these stories of what life was like in Monterey and Carmel for the Japanese community here. And a lot of talk about the building of the church here. So the church is really important to the Japanese community here in Monterey. Any interest in those letters, we do have them all digitized. If you'd like to see them sometime, we can show them to you. We're working on eventually have an exhibit about her and her letters, because there are actually some remarkable things in those letters. One of them was my favorite. There was an abalone fisherman, or not abalone fisherman, a sardine fisherman who lived very close to here, and she was concerned because this is about 1920, and she was concerned because the fishermen were on strike. And she was concerned that he wasn't making any money. If you know the idea of union, you know, the fishermen in Monterey were unionized from the jump. I take that back. The boat owners were unionized from the jump. The crewmen were not. And beginning about 1920, it became kind of an annual event for these fishermen to go on strike, these boat owners, for higher prices for their catch. Right? And these strikes could last for several weeks. So if you're a crewman and you're not fishing, then you're not making any money. You're not making any money, you can't feed your family, you can't pay your rent, right? And so in 1926, after about a 6-week strike, these Monterey fishermen, the crew members, formed their own union, Monterey Fishermen Protective Union, right? And then from November 27, 1928, and then 1926, then they're all fired on November 27, 1920, or November 28, 1926, by those boat owners. We don't need you, they said. We're going to get these big sardine boats called purse seiners. We don't need as many fishermen. And Newt Hogan's cannery, where the aquarium is today, he said, anybody go out there and fish sardines, so I'll send out my cannery workers. Well, after about 6 weeks of seasick cannery workers, those guys had their own union. So she was concerned about that. She was writing these guys to make sure they're okay and they can feed their families, that kind of thing. Which I think is kind of cool. All right, so I don't know if you can see it, but there's a building that says Pete's Net Storage right there. That goes back to the 30s, and a lot of fishermen during the off-season, they store their nets in that building. Many Japanese fishermen. So wharf number 2, this wharf also opened in 1926. It was as support for the Monterey sardine fishery. That's what they built it. At one point they planned to build a giant breakwater. We go from wharf number 1 all the way across the harbor here to wharf number 2, which totally would change Monterey Bay if they did that, so we're really glad they didn't do that. Of course, there's a train station over there. So if you listened to us yesterday on the stories, Junosuke Kodani would have come to that train station in 1898 when he arrived here. The Amadires would have come to that train station in 1898, got picked up at that station, taken down to Noda's campsite on Cannery Row. All of that. That's where Pop Ernest would go every day to get his oysters, hoping they weren't spoiled when he got there that day. All of that little train station right there. Now it's the brewery, which I think Pop would be very proud of. It was. But thanks.
Tim, I have a question. When they built this in 1926, was there already a wharf on the other side, or did that come later?
Yeah, so the wharf, number 1, we think of, the touristy wharf we think of today, was the first wharf was built in 1845, with a crib work kind of set up, built by Thomas Larkin, and then 1870, the Pacific Steamship Company came in and put a proper wooden work there. And then when the Hotel Del Monte opened here in 1880, with the Naval Post Graduate School, they built this wooden boardwalk that stretched from the hotel all the way along the waterfront to the wharf. It was sort of a touristy kind of thing. They had glass bottom boat rides, and sailboat rides, and they had beach pavilions for the guests to stay on, to spend the day at the beach. And then when the sardine fishery, abalone fishery began to develop, it becomes a really working man's wharf. And then when the sardine fishery really collapses, it reverts back to what it initially was, sort of a tourist interested wharf. And this has still always been the sort of working man's wharf today that we use it. And then we can talk, you want to do some education stuff.
Yeah, we've got one group in there right now. Art's down below with one group.
Very
I'll
good.
start with your group, and then we'll break you guys apart as well. And so those who are willing and wanting, we can
Go
have
down
you to take
below.
you down.
It's a very cool thing.
And those who are not wanting, we have other life things you can check
you
out
guys are great.
too. So, yeah.
So here we are, Monterey Abalone Farm. How long you guys been here since?
Since the early 90s. So
Yeah, early 90s. That's when I first
Yeah.
got art. And
Art CV and
what was that guy's name?
Joe Kavanaugh.
Joe, that's it,
Kavanaugh's
Joe
the
Kavanaugh.
one who started it.
So, see, I'm getting old, man. So I'm going to leave you here. You're in good hands. I have to go back to the hall and help clean up from the last 2 days. But I hope you guys enjoy the Abalone Festival. I thank you for coming today. I'm really honored y'all came. We were a little worried. Who's going to show up for this kind of stuff? So I'm really honored. So thank you. I'm very honored to have Amanda, who's going to part owner of the Monterey Abalone Farm. She's going to help give the tours today. If you guys ever have any questions or anything, let me know. I'm easy to find on email. You can find me at timsardine@yahoo.com. How can you forget?
Thanks,
Tim Sardine. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you guys again. Again, I mentioned I do free walking tours on the first Saturday of every month, and starting on the third Saturday of this year, we're getting tours of the Japanese town a little bit longer than we did today, and also include a tour of our museum. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Of course. Well, welcome. I wasn't sure who was coming or how many were coming. We've had so many trickle in already, and I keep my eye out to see if there's a big group, and sure enough, there's a big group. Wow, you guys really did show up for this. That's awesome. I love that there's so much love for abalone out there. So, welcome to the Monterey Abalone Company. You've probably heard a ton already, but we are one of 3 farms left in the U.S. One of 2 here in California, and the third is on the Big Island. And so what makes our farm unique is that we're in ocean. Compared to the one that's down in Santa Barbara, the Cultured Abalone, also an amazing operation. They're land-based, so they farm them in tanks and much larger than our operations for that reason. Joe Kavanaugh, as mentioned, was the one who started this farm back in 1992 as a research project for the city, actually, and it turned into something much more. He met the right people along the way with great ideas and ambition, and together they built the Abalone Company. And a few years later, Art came in, which you'll meet. He's just down with another group, and he's been here ever since. Joe Kavanaugh is now retired and living the life in Florida, and we're carrying it on. Myself, I'm an abalone farmer. My background's in marine science, also education. I also teach 6th grade math and science, so it's a busy time of year for me. We're just about to go back. But I've been here for about 15 years, and my dad was also one of the owners, and he's since retired, and I've stepped into his shoes. And so you'll get to meet a few of our other guys along the way too. So to sum up our operation, which you're going to get to see firsthand, is we're in ocean aquaculture. So we do that via cage culture. So that's the part you're going to get to see below. I guess I should back it up. We have a hatchery at the Moss Landing Marine Labs. We have a space out there, and that's where we spawn our own abalone, our baby abalone. And when they're about a year old, they're about the size of your pinky nail. Their shell size is about that size, so teeny tiny guys. When they're about that old, that's when we bring them here, when they're not too small to fall out of our mesh cages. And then we put them into cages and we hang those down below, and then we go out and we harvest kelp, fresh kelp, using just a kitchen knife off the side of the boat. You've probably seen us, if you're local, you've probably seen our boat out there a time or two. There are certain areas that we go and other areas that we definitely stay away from, and we're very mindful of the areas that we're harvesting, because that resource is just as crucial and important to us as it is to the sea otters and every other living creature that depends on it. And so we don't want to add any extra pressure that we don't need to add to the kelp beds. So we don't use a big giant kelp cutting boat. Again, hand harvest, we only trim the canopies, we never remove the whole plant.
You're
And so
replacing Stellar sea cows.
yes, we are the West Coast Stellar sea cows. We do that 3 or 4 times a week. We bring that back. We pull every cage up on the farm. We give them a nice pressure wash with seawater, just to knock off any encrusting organisms. We check for anything that might have made its way into the cage that might be bothering them, like a kelp crab or something like that. And then we fill them up with kelp and send them back down, and they'll eat through it. Next week it'll be empty and they'll be ready for some more. Of course, that's the simplified version. There's a lot that goes into this. As they grow, we need to thin those cages out. So they're all on a schedule, and then of course sometimes, and we want this, they grow faster than we planned on them doing, and so we might need to bump up their schedule, and we might take 2/3 out, put them into another cage, and so it just depends on the size and the stage that they're at. Yes?
When do you harvest them?
The abalone, we harvest them every week. Every week we're harvesting based on just demand. So we typically sell 4 different sizes. And so there's a size range, we go by millimeter length. And within that range, we're either harvesting abalone that are about 1/4 pound each, or 1/3 of a pound, 1/2 pound, and 1 pound. And those are the 4 sizes we typically sell on a regular base. And so, yes.
What species?
Red abalone.
Red.
Great question. Yeah, red abalone is the species that we're farming here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And how big is a 1 pounder? How big is that shell?
It's about 6 inches, give or take. Yeah. And that it can take us anywhere from 8 to 10 years to grow it out to that size. So we typically don't have very many of them, and when we do, they sell very quickly. In fact, we don't have any of those right now. We only have up to the 1/2 pound size. And so it's based on demand. So we have our regular customers, and then there's people that can walk in anytime or call us anytime. And so we just monitor it. We'll harvest every week what we anticipate we'll need. We'd rather leave them untouched and feeding and happy as long as we can. And if we need to harvest more, we will. But we harvest every week, and just the amount and how much time it takes depends on what's going on. There are busier times of year and slower times of year, and so it ebbs and flows. But great question. Yes?
Do you sell them still live?
Yes, we do. Great question. We sell them all live in the shell. We're not set up for processing, but that's also what gives it that unique experience for everybody as well. We do offer tools to help, and prep sheets and pictures to help people know what to do with them if you're not already familiar, but we sell them live in the shell, and we sell them per pound. So the prices are all per pound. Yeah. Right now we have 12. They're not all full-time. So, and it ranges, usually about 10 to 12 we have at any one time. We have one person who manages our hatchery, and that's there full-time, and then we have usually a crew of 4 that are working down below to go harvest the kelp and feed out the abalone every week, and then we have a few others that are wearing many hats at any given time. So yes.
Approximately how many pounds of abalone do you sell in a year?
In a year, that's a great question that I don't have the answer to off the top of my head. I don't even know the number off the top of my head, to be quite honest with you, but I could certainly find it for you and get back to you on that one. Yeah. Art might have that question, that answer too, so we'll save that one.
Are the little ones put in the cages with larger ones at the same time?
No, great question. No, we try to keep them within their cohort so we can track their growth rates. Once they start getting mixed with like abalone from the year prior, then we don't really know who's growing fast or who's growing slow, and that's another thing we try to be mindful of. Like I said, we love it when they grow fast. So we have what we call fast growers. We'll take those guys out when they're reaching marks before their others in their cohort. So we try and keep them all together. Yeah. Another great question. Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many abalone you have down there?
I do. We have about 200,000 right now on the farm. But many of those are little guys. And so the bigger ones, it's, you know, there's less as time goes on, we sell them. But yeah, about 200,000 right now. I want to say we have about between 150 to 200 cages on the farm right now as well, too. So, which is another part of our operation. We make all our own cages. Everything we use, we make the cages that we use to harvest the kelp in our boat. It's all custom made with our own material, things that work for us. Our cage design has changed and evolved over the years based on trial and error, and sea otters get really smart and we have to figure out what the next best option is. And so there's a lot of that going on too. Yes? So they start out microscopic, and then, the cages, I'll show you. Well, whoever takes you down will show you. You will get to see them, yes, and you will see how they're divided up and where they live until they go to dinner. Yeah, yes.
In the early days, were there any problems with sea otters?
Yes, major problems. Yeah, another great question. So and you'll see this too when you guys get to go down on our farm. There's a really tiny, we call it the old walkway, and this is where the business started. It's really tiny, and we started in still aquaculture, obviously, in the ocean, but through 50-gallon barrels, and not the cages. And otters figured out that was pretty easy to get to. So we evolved into cages and with a bit more sturdy material. And so yes, otter, and the thing is, it just takes one of those little guys, and then he tells all his otter friends, and then they've had themselves a nice lunch in no time. Yes.
I think that you guys started about 5 years before the abalone season closed.
Well, let's see. So you've been able to recreationally harvest red abalone north of San Francisco up till about 7 years ago. Am I right on that? It's not far off that. So you can still get it recreational, only red abalone, really strict limits.
Right, but south of the Golden Gate, I thought it had been closed since '97.
I think that is right for the red abalone, yeah. So, but you could still go get it up to just a few years ago, and now they've closed it for a lot longer. I don't think they're going to open it up again. So, yes, and when I started, which was only about 15 years ago, there was 13 other farms in California. So we're down to 2, and that's just in 15 years' time. So I don't even know what was there before me, to be honest. And they've closed for different reasons. Some people did their farms on land that was leased, and then somebody in the family would pass on and decide they want to do something else with the land, and so they've all closed for different reasons. But 13, and now we're down to 2. That's a big change. 15 years. Yes.
What about the pearls that come from black pearls?
Yeah, mother of pearl. That's a natural occurrence that happens. It's like they get a little air bubble in the process of them growing their shell, and that's what creates that beautiful pearl. You can also, and there was a farm, not here, I forget where they were, that made their whole business off of pearls. So you can inoculate them, and it's a very delicate process though, because they are hemophilic. So it only takes one good nick and they will slowly bleed out. So yeah, it's a tough thing to do, but you could manually do it too. Yeah. Yes.
What percent do you lose?
It's white height from the beginning. It's like, I want to say it's like 95%. From the time we spawn, what we start with, to what we end up with. We just spawned 6 million back in March.
No, you're on the wrong wharf, my dear.
We're down to I forget what the number is, but it's like, so, yeah, it's small. Yeah, that's a good question. Yes?
You said you go fit them once in a while. What kind of stuff you use to fit them with?
Just the kelp. So we go out here and harvest kelp from our canopy, from the canopies, and so it's the giant macrocystis. That's their basic diet. However, when we have like the swells that push up the red algae onto the beaches, if it's in an area that we can go and collect, we'll go out and collect as much of that red algae as we can too, because they love that, and it's really like a good vitamin boost for them. So whenever we can get that, we will. We just won't go harvest that because we'd have to scuba dive, and there's not enough of it out there to supplement their whole diet with. But on that note, during the summer months when there's a lot of sunlight and the kelp is at its peak growth, we will harvest more than what we need for a week, and then we salt it. And that lets us preserve it so that when we get into the winter months and it's too rough to get out, and or the swells are tearing up our kelp beds, and I mentioned we want to protect it and not put that added pressure on, we'll fall back on that. So we can just kind of let things recover and settle. And that's what those bins are behind you. That's what we use those for. Those are empty ones, but we've got them down the side, around the other side. So we seal them in an airtight bag, and it'll keep like that for years. And then we just kind of rehydrate it with some water, rinse it off, and feed it, and they love it. So that's just one way we help it.
Who came up with doing that, drying it and then?
So I believe it was a grad student at Moss Landing Marine Labs at some point. It was one of his projects, and along with drying kelp, we also were growing different algae, like gracilaria. We had some lines out here, so it was all part of that, and we've carried on with it, and it's been extremely helpful. So yeah. Yes.
Do you need permits to?
Yes. Lots of permits everywhere.
So this is not a marine protected area?
It is. All of Monterey is a marine protected area, but then you have different levels of protection at different spaces. Like there's marine reserves within this marine protected area, and that's a no take. Nothing but photos. And then there's other places like here, or there used to be a kelp bed over here, but because the urchins, there's no longer a kelp bed over there. That would be open for us to harvest. Most of our harvest comes right off of Cannery Row before you hit the aquarium, because then you're back into that reserve area. And then Lover's Point is another one of our main collection areas. Yeah.
So that's not a protected area?
It's all protected area, but it's not a reserve. So we can harvest kelp from it, yes. Yes.
Did the big fire in Moss Landing affected your?
Another great question. It did not, thankfully, as far as we can tell. That was monitored very, very closely. Our water was monitored, everything, and it's still continuing to be monitored. But so far, we've seen no effect from it. So we got very lucky. That was one that I was holding my breath on. Yes.
So I see not as much kelp in your or it's diminished so incredibly. So are you finding it not?
Yes, we are, but recently we've been harvesting more out of still water, which does not have this option. They are having a hard time getting their boats in and out because there's so much kelp, but the urchins haven't made their way into the spots, and then it's protected too within that cove, so it's not being hit by the swell. So we do notice, and it'll come back here in Cannery Row. Still not like it used to be 10 years ago, but the density that it has had for the past few years, that will come back. However, this El Nino, that's another thing. So being that we're an in-ocean farm, we deal with a lot of just the elements of nature. And so things like this El Nino, where warmer water temperatures are going to be a factor that will affect us. Not so much the abalone, only because we are really centrally located in their like natural range. So if the water temperature raises or falls a few degrees, they're going to be okay. Too much, of course, would be harmful, but we're not talking about anything that drastic. But it will affect things like kelp production. It will affect things like algal blooms, red tides, and not all red tides are dangerous, but some of them are. They're grazers, so we don't really have to worry about things like paralytic shellfish poisoning because they're not filter feeding. but it is a problem that the red tides, the algal blooms within that will suck up the oxygen in the water. And so there's different things we'll do depending. We might drop our cages to the bottom where the oxygen's a little bit higher down there. So those are things that we have to look out for. And El Nino, especially with the kelp beds and production, we've been harvesting a lot, salting a lot, preserving a lot in anticipation that it's probably gonna do a pretty good dent this year. And hopefully we're wrong about that, but all the predictions are not looking good. So, yeah. Any other questions? I think the tour from down below is coming up, and I can introduce you to Art and take another group down below. All right, and feel free to make your way down there. He's still talking to that group over there too, but there's pinks in there you can see.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Protecting our own public forests nearby for farm like us. It would be worth going out and doing your piece matching if they let us, just to protect our local kelp forests, because we rely on this stuff.
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, that is close It's more, I mean, we do have consistent beds right in front of Cannery Row and right in front of Lover's Point, but like my boss used to tell me, like, 15 years ago, like the kelp forest would just come and it would be all around this part right here, all around the beaches in front of there. Now there's none in front of there. We have to go up to the Cannery Row to go find the kelp here. So there's definitely been a big local reduction. And other parts of California have gotten it a lot worse than us. So.
We'll squeeze out a little bit.
They feed that in their lab. We feed our sea stars mussels. So we just have clumps of mussels and they'll go off and they just put their organs and both organs on the outside.
He did mention that their education and outreach thing is fairly new to
awesome. So I think
might be a right
switching tours.